Chapter 530. It was getting closer and closer to noon. The east gate of the west side of the city was tightly shut. It was as though they would not budge no matter what happened. However, if one were to walk behind the east gate, one would see that there were many Jianghu soldiers gathered there. Among them, there were elephant soldiers riding on elephants, black soldiers with darker skin than normal people, and the crown prince's soldiers and the king's guards. A total of 100,000 people were gathered outside the east gate. Due to the large number of people, the line was already 10 miles from the city center. This was the Jianghu army's tactic. Once the battle started, they would use the human wave tactic to charge out. As long as they could reach the mercenaries, they would see the hope of victory. As for the 150,000 Jianghu soldiers, 50,000 were left in the city to protect the trebuchets and maintain order in the city. The other 100,000 were at the north and south gates, waiting for the elite Jianghu soldiers to charge out so that they could surround them from the sides. In short, they wanted to use their advantage in numbers to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Inside the east gate, 10,000 crown prince's soldiers were ready to charge at the front lines. Behind them were 10 moving metal chariots. Inside the chariots were some strong men who used their legs to help them move. In the eye sockets of the chariots, there were 20 crossbowmen who were ready to fire at any time. These were the defensive measures that the Jianghu army had come up with in a short period of time to counter the fire of firearms. Whether it was the metal chariots or the metal shields, once they could block the bullets, the soldiers behind would have more chances to charge forward and engage in close combat. With this, the Jianghu army had a chance of victory. The Jianghu army had made their final preparations. The mercenaries outside the city were also checking their guns and ammunition for the last time. Compared to the nervous Jianghu soldiers in the city, they were more excited. This was a battle that could wipe out a nation. The sixth young master was watching them from behind. Every soldier had a chance to perform. Everyone wanted to achieve merit in this battle and return to Xianxia city with their medals to receive the congratulations of their family and friends. However, there was one thing that puzzled Luo Pa, the commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment. That was why the sixth young master didn't order them to attack the city. He only ordered them to guard the area 2 li in front of the city gates and surround the area in a fan shape. Commander, what is the sixth young master's intention? Will they be able to charge out if we guard like this? 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin came to Luo Po's side and asked in confusion. Clearly, he was also confused about the formation. Of course, Luo Po would not say that he did not know how the 6th young master arranged it. As a superior, he glared at Kong Chuanxin and said, "Return to your commanding position. Do you need me to say more about obeying orders?" Kong Chuanxin reluctantly returned to his position after being given the cold shoulder. He raised his head and looked at the sky. He seemed to be looking at the sun to see if it was noon. Just as he was about to do that, a few huge flames streaked across his pupils. He swore that the flames instantly attracted all his attention. His gaze moved instinctively and he saw the flames falling in an arc into Xianxia city. Then, a series of loud noises that made him feel stupefied and the entire earth trembled. Boom 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 boom. The power of the mortars was on full display at this moment. Especially when those cannonballs fell into the predetermined coordinates, which was the east side of the city, the lethality and destructive power it brought was very shocking. The streets and alleys were filled with elite Jianghu soldiers. They were waiting for the mercenaries to get close enough to open the city gates and charge out like a gust of wind. Although such an attack would inevitably result in some casualties, who wouldn't die in a war? Moreover, the general had said that once they reached the side of the mercenaries, the scales of victory would tip in their favor. The general also said that no matter who it was, as long as they managed to snatch an advanced firearm from the mercenaries, they would be able to exchange it for 200 taels of silver. 200 taels of silver. Compared to the Jianghu soldiers who only received 2 taels of silver a month, that was equivalent to 10 years of their income. How could such a reward not excite them? Some of the more impatient ones couldn't resist the urge to open the city gates and charge out. The saying, "A man will die for wealth," was vividly displayed at this moment. This was also the reason why there were so many Jianghu soldiers at the east gate. Yet there wasn't any chaos. There weren't any fights between soldiers either. Perhaps everyone's attention was focused outside the city, on the battlefield, thinking of ways to earn more money. Who would be willing to cause more trouble? It was precisely because these people were gathered together that when the mortar shells landed in the eastern part of the city, the destructive power and lethality caused by them was extremely shocking. Many of the soldiers didn't raise their heads to look, so they naturally didn't know where the cannonballs would land. Of course, even if they looked, they wouldn't know where the safest place was either. Based on the speed of sound, the whistling sound was heard first. Then, in less than a second, the cannonballs that were powerful enough to deafen and incinerate people landed on the ground, displaying their formidable might. Every time the cannonballs landed, the area within 30 meters around them would become the most dangerous zone. This was especially so when the cannonballs landed within a radius of 3 meters around them. A huge crater was formed. Regardless of who it was or what it was, they would instantly be reduced to charcoal. Then there was the area of 10 meters around them. Anyone who stood in this area would be instantly dismembered. Even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them. Even at the outer perimeter, there were still many cannonball fragments flying about. Even if it was just one fragment, it would be enough to cause them to fall to the ground and cry out in pain. At the same time, they would completely lose their ability to fight. Their miserable cries would also greatly affect the morale of the surrounding soldiers. 5 mortar shells were fired from 5 different positions in a very short period of time. The lethality and destruction caused by the shells could no longer be described with words. For some of the Jianghu soldiers, there was nothing to be afraid of. Or rather, they didn't know what fear was. However, for those who were still alive, it was indeed a great shock. That kind of feeling could really be described as a living hell, because they didn't know where that godlike thing would land next. Would it just happen to land on their heads? One had to know that this was a mortar taken out from Dachong. Even the shells were produced by Dachong. This made their accuracy and explosive power extremely high. These cannonballs were also developed by the modern army after countless efforts and experiments. They were meant to be used by the grassroots army and were extremely useful. The 25 cannonballs were equivalent to 25 godlike things. This had already scared the higher-ups of Jianghu silly. King Li of Jianghu was already dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say, nor did he know how to describe his current feelings. Perhaps if he had to say it, King Li would definitely curse him for not saying anything when he had such a powerful weapon and only using it now. What was the point of fighting this war then? If the godlike thing was even more furious, perhaps there wouldn't even be a need to fight this war. Xianxia city would be bombed into ruins and all of them would become fertilizer and be buried in this land forever. Father, what should we do? The crown prince, Li Yuanlong, was also enraged by the god of heaven and lost his temper. He looked at his father with eyes filled with endless fear and terror. Open the city gates and rush out. No matter what, we can't admit defeat like this. Also, think of a way to leave behind some of our elites. We will leave from the west gate and head to the commandant's city. King Li had no choice but to prepare for the worst. Abandoning Xianxia city and heading to the commandant's city was a chess piece that Li had prepared. He thought that this move wouldn't be necessary and would only be used after a period of time. However, it seemed like he had no choice but to use it in advance. Yes. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong calmed down a little after hearing his father's words and went to pass down the order. Outside Xianxia city, the mercenaries were also shocked by the power of the mortar. In fact, it wasn't the first time some of them had seen the power of a cannon. In fact, the power of a cannon was far greater than the power of a mortar. However, because they hadn't received any news previously, they were shocked by this sudden change. Look, the city gates are open. The Jianghu soldiers are about to rush out. It was unknown which Lung Feng suddenly shouted, drawing everyone's attention to him. As the commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Po's ears were still buzzing. No matter what, the fact that he was able to take on the role of a regiment commander was enough to prove his high mental fortitude. Therefore, when he saw that the city gate was open from the inside, he began to shout loudly. At the same time, he also gave an order, "Everyone, get ready. Our chance to shine is here. Check your guns and prepare grenades." Chapter 531. The order was passed down one by one. Soon, a main battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion and 7 auxiliary battalions raised their guns and aimed at the Jianghu soldiers coming out of the city. It had to be said that elites were indeed elites. Regardless of whether it was the Crown Prince's guards holding shields or the King's guards moving out of the city, they did not panic as they exited the city. It was as though the cannon fire did not affect them too much. That was the truth. The cannon fire landed on the east side of the city. As the guards at the city gate, They were not affected much, but the sound of the explosion was slightly louder. They were not affected too much, so the moment they walked out of the city, they appeared to be in an orderly manner. In fact, there was even a dignified aura that was revealed. They want to use their shields and carts to defend against our firearms? The political commissar of the Cold Vanguard 2nd Battalion, Kong Jie, looked at the formation of the Jianghu soldiers and said emotionally, "Humph, prepare to fire the rocket launchers." Commander Luo Pa only glanced at them casually before making the necessary arrangements. He wanted the enemy to know how laughable their carts and shields were in front of mercenaries. Of course, this was only preparation for the worst. After all, rocket launchers could not be considered a conventional weapon due to the limited production capacity of Xianxia City's munitions factory. It would be best if they could use them sparingly. Let's get them to fire first and see what happens. Luo Pa did not immediately give the order to fire the rocket launchers. Instead, he gave the order to fire first. He wanted to see if the shields and carts could really defend against bullets. The Cold Vanguard Battalion and the auxiliary soldiers who had been itching to attack for a long time were waiting for their commander's order. After the order was given, a series of gunshots rang out. Bronze-colored bullet shells were scattered everywhere. The bullets that were shot out also hit the iron shields and iron carriages that came out first. The Jianghu soldiers who were well prepared in this aspect performed well in the face of the bullets. Other than a few shield-wielding soldiers who accidentally exposed their heads, most of the Jianghu soldiers were able to block this wave of attacks and did not suffer any damage. General Fan Yuhai, who was standing behind Iron Shield, was overjoyed when he saw the results of the battle. He took the opportunity to loudly encourage his soldiers. "Very good. Everyone should have seen it. Their guns are useless against us. Listen to my orders. Advance." Needless to say, the faces of the Jianghu soldiers were filled with excitement. They were still worried that their shields wouldn't be able to withstand the seemingly omnipotent muskets, but after seeing that their shields were actually effective, the soldiers' morale was boosted, and following a loud yell, their footsteps seemed to have become a lot more relaxed. With these shield soldiers and metal chariots blocking the front, more and more Jianghu elites charged out from the city. They moved forward slowly while preparing for a full-scale assault. The shields were made of pure pig iron, and their thickness of nearly 10 centimeters made them impervious to long-range bullets. However, at the same time, it also increased the weight of the shields, causing their movement speed to become extremely slow. Even so, they continued to work hard. At least they saw the hope of success. "Sure enough, it can block bullets," Wang Yao said. 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa looked at the scene in front of him and frowned slightly. However, he quickly relaxed. "Regiment Commander, can we use the rocket launchers to blast them away?" Political Commissar Kong Jie asked worriedly. "There's no rush. Let's wait for more of them to come out." Political Commissar, didn't you see that the 6th Young Master side had stopped firing? Hehe. Luo Pa was very relaxed when he spoke of this. Clearly, everything that happened before his eyes was within his expectations. Political Commissar Kong Jie wanted to say something, but when he heard that even the 6th Young Master side had stopped moving, he nodded in realization. It seemed like the 6th Young Master wanted to eliminate the main force of the Jianghu army outside the city. If they used the rocket launchers now, it would only scare them away. Once they entered the city, it would be much more troublesome to start a street fight. After the regiment commander and political commissar understood everything, the mercenaries naturally quieted down. However, this silence was only the calm before the storm. The Jianghu army naturally didn't know about this. Even the commanding general, one of the famous generals of Jianghu, Fan Yuhai, didn't think too much about it. In his opinion, the mercenaries must be helpless against such a strategy. Next, it was time for him to show off his skills. As for why the so-called God's Fury didn't appear, it was very likely that the enemy had used up all their ammunition. One couldn't blame Fan Yuhai for thinking this way. Even though he was a famous general, when faced with unknown advanced firearms, his imagination was pitiful. The Jianghu army was still accelerating their formation. They were continuously sending out large numbers of soldiers outside the city in preparation for the final battle. When this news was sent to the temporary palace in the city, King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong couldn't help but sigh in relief. When the artillery shells landed and started to wreak havoc in the city, they really thought that the situation was over. Their hearts couldn't help but turn cold. However, The sudden change in the battlefield gave them new hope. Good, good. Inform General Fan and General Chen to do as they please. As long as we can defeat the mercenaries and take the advanced firearms in their hands, it will be worth it no matter what price we have to pay. He was afraid that the two generals at the front wouldn't be able to give it their all. At this moment, King Lili gave them a lot of power. However, King Lili didn't know. Perhaps he had placed all his attention on the battlefield in the east of the city. He didn't know that in the west of the city, there was a faction opposing him that was growing. The master behind this faction was the minister of the Imperial court and the minister of the west of the city, Chen Di. Last night, he'd said that he'd come to an agreement with Yun Quebec. No matter if it was for the sake of his own survival or for the sake of the Chen clan that stood behind him, he didn't have a path of retreat now. It was either death or destruction, so he would naturally choose the death of others. After Chen Di made his decision, the advantages he had gained from managing the west of the city for many years were finally revealed. After he gathered some of his trusted subordinates and Chen clan members, he raised the slogan of opposing King Lili. He claimed that it was because of King Lili's arrogance that he sent people to assassinate the Duke of Zhongdan of the Great Ming dynasty, that the entire Jianghu kingdom was in danger. If they wanted to resolve this matter and survive, there was only one way. That was to overthrow King Lili and build a new kingdom in the Jianghu region under the leadership of the mercenaries. In order to gain everyone's support and trust, Chen Di even told them that he had met with the mercenaries and that they had agreed to let him build an army of 10,000. There was no other way. Although most of the people were trustworthy, their opponent was King Lili. Who knew if there would be a snitch? As expected, after Chen Di said that he had met with the mercenaries, the restless crowd quickly calmed down. As an opponent, the mercenaries were very terrifying. But once they became friends, this fear would no longer appear on them. Instead, it would become a great help, wouldn't it? Rather than saying that they trusted Chen Di, it was more accurate to say that they trusted the mercenaries. But no matter what the outcome was, these people had been successfully instigated to defect. The first thing they did was to target the catapults that were everywhere in the city. The catapults were one of the most advanced and commonly used long-range projectile weapons of that era. They were originally prepared to deal with the mercenaries that entered the city. When the huge rock suddenly fell from the sky, although they would suffer losses, the mercenaries wouldn't be in a better situation. This thing was also what the City Security Bureau's Foreign Affairs Division, Skylark, and the others were afraid of. After receiving the 6th Young Master's order, they decided to remove this danger first. This also made Chen Di and the others valuable to be used. With these people's response and their subordinates, the 10,000 Jianghu soldiers were quickly under their control. Then they charged towards the catapults in the city and began to destroy them. King Lili didn't know about this. By the time he received this news, the situation had already been decided and the losses could not be recovered. Outside the east side of the city, apart from Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who had followed his father's orders and called back the 5,000 Crown Prince guards, the other 100,000 elites were quickly leaving the city and getting into formation. An army of nearly 100,000. If all of them were deployed, it would be a very large force. Just looking at it from afar would make one's legs go soft and their entire body tremble. After all, this scale was enough to make anyone who was advancing feel fear. Commander Luo Pei also knew this and didn't want his soldiers to experience this. Although he had confidence in the mercenaries, especially in Lang Feng, it was better not to try some things. Therefore, when the other side left the city with about 50,000 people, he waved his hand and ordered the 5 rocket launchers to each lead 5 deputies to move to the west of the city under the east city gate. There was no other way. The effective range of the rocket launcher was only around 200 meters. Right now, the distance between the two sides was at least 500 meters. Although this distance was shrinking as the Jianghu army continued to leave the city, he couldn't wait any longer. He could only order the rocket launchers to attack first. Chapter 532. A total of 30 people left the group and charged forward. This scene was witnessed by the commander of the Jianghu army, General Fan Yuhai. Although he did not know what these people were doing, his instincts told him that they were up to no good. However, even though he knew this, he did not have any better ideas. After all, the movement speed of the Iron Shield soldiers was too slow. If he sent other people to charge forward, they would be met with countless musket fire. It was no different from seeking death. The only thing he could do now was to wait and see what the other side was going to do. Of course, if the other side really rushed to 100 meters away from him, then the crossbowmen in the iron carriage would be able to play their role. Those crossbows had been heavily modified and could shoot up to 130 meters away. Within this distance, they were the kings of existence. Obviously, the rocket launchers had a range of 200 meters, so they definitely wouldn't rush into the range of 130 meters. When the distance reached 180 meters, they took the initiative to stop. Then, they put the rocket launchers on their shoulders and prepared to fire the rocket launchers. What are they doing? Seeing this scene, the Jianghu soldiers could not help but stop in their tracks. Even the Iron Shield soldiers and Iron Chariot soldiers did the same. Before figuring out the enemy's goal, no one would foolishly charge forward. Under everyone's gaze, the 5 soldiers with the rocket launchers launched their unique attack. Boom 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 boom. 5 strong lights flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, they were accompanied by a series of loud rumbling sounds. In the front row of the Jianghu army, the Iron Shield soldiers were engulfed by the powerful force of the rocket launchers and fell to the ground. Even 2 out of the 10 Iron Chariots were hit. The instantaneous high temperature and the aftermath of the explosion turned the Iron Chariots into fiery red chariots. The Jianghu soldiers inside were turned into roasted ducks. No! Seeing how powerful the rocket launcher was, Fan Yuhai, who was hiding behind the Iron Shield soldier, screamed in pain. As if to prove his cry, a series of gunshots were heard. The Jianghu soldiers who were not protected by the Iron Shield soldiers became the targets of the mercenaries. As the bullets flew, the Jianghu soldiers fell to the ground one after another. Boom 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 boom. Another wave of rocket launchers was launched, and the shield-wielding soldiers were sent flying into the air. 2 more armored vehicles were hit and turned into scrap metal. More and more Jianghu soldiers were exposed and became the targets of the mercenaries. Every moment, every breath, every second, the Jianghu soldiers would lose their lives. The scales of victory on the battlefield seemed to be tilting in their favor. All troops attack. Fan Yuhai, who was protected by a group of personal guards, saw more and more soldiers being shot. He knew that if he continued to wait, the morale of the army would crumble and they would definitely lose the battle. Thus, he directly gave the order for the entire army to charge. Fortunately, there was only a distance of 500 meters between the 2 sides. As long as they were fast enough, there was still a chance for them to reach the mercenaries. If that was the case, the situation would very likely develop in their favor. Retreat! Seeing that the Jianghu soldiers had launched their attack, the rocket launchers who originally wanted to continue the fight hurriedly retreated. They formed a group of 6. After countless rounds of training, the speed of their retreat was so fast that the pursuing Jianghu soldiers could only look on in the dust. Furthermore, if they wanted to continue the pursuit, they would have to face the rain of bullets. Yes, it was a rain of bullets. If Yang Chendong knew that the Jianghu army would send out a large number of soldiers, he would have prepared 9 squad machine guns for the 3rd Battalion of Lung Feng. On average, each squad would have 1 machine gun. He also prepared 3 rounds of bullets in order to prevent the Jianghu soldiers from suddenly charging forward. As such, the soldiers of the Jianghu army surged forward like a tidal wave, and what welcomed them was a torrent of bullets. When the squad machine guns fired at a rate of nearly 1,000 bullets per minute, the charging Jianghu soldiers fell to the ground in droves. This attack greatly suppressed the momentum of the Jianghu soldiers charging forward. No one was unafraid of death. So what if they were elite soldiers? With the help of the squad machine guns, the charging momentum of the Jianghu soldiers was greatly suppressed. This caused the 2 generals, Fan Yuhai and Chen Heijin, to have a pained expression. Chen Heijin's eyes were filled with tears when he saw his elite black soldiers charge forward crazily and fall to the ground one by one, unable to stand up again. These black soldiers were the elites that he had accumulated over many years in the army. With them, he was able to achieve what he wanted. It was only because of them that the Jianghu army dared to go against the Southern Ming Empire, and even interfere with their internal affairs. But now, under such a large number of deaths, how could Chen Heijin, as a general, not feel heartache? Get me an elephant. I want to go into battle personally. He could not watch the deaths in his hands. More importantly, he could not even get within 200 meters of the enemy. At this moment, Chen Heijin was furious. Not only that, he even made the decision to go into battle personally. General! Naturally, some of Chen Heijin's personal guards wanted to stop him. However, Chen Heijin, who was in a killing frenzy, would not listen to his subordinates' advice. He shook his head and walked towards an elephant. 20,000 war elephants. This was the strongest force that the Jianghu army had. It was also the only chance of victory. After all, elephants had thick skin and flesh. Perhaps they were the only ones that could ignore the bullets and charge into the mercenary camp. Chen Heijin climbed onto the back of the elephant. He had already placed a chain around it to ensure that it would not fall off if it moved. Then, he waved the long sword in his hand and shouted the word, "Kill." Chen Heijin led 20,000 elephant soldiers and tens of thousands of black soldiers in a suicidal charge. Thump 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 thump. The heavy elephant body stomped on the ground, bringing with it a series of rumbling sounds. When the 20,000 elephants attacked from the front and back, the momentum was terrifying. On the side of the mercenaries, the 18,000 Jianghu mercenaries were shocked. As a former member of the Jianghu people, they knew a thing or two about these war elephants. Some of them even knew that the elephant army played a decisive role in the battle against the great Ming dynasty's musketeers. Now, could the musketeers of the mercenaries stop the elephants from getting closer? If they could not, once these war elephants charged into the camp, they would start wreaking havoc. Once the rest of the Jianghu army charged in, would they still be able to win? It was no wonder that the Jianghu mercenaries were so afraid. After all, the mindset of first sight is the most important thing, could affect a person. While they were worried, the remaining 6 iron chariots of the Jianghu army started to move forward. The thousands of iron shield soldiers who had regrouped were moving behind the elephant army. They looked like they were going to take advantage of the situation and charge forward. This was the real attack. The Jianghu army was unleashing their last bit of potential. It was not an exaggeration to say that if they could withstand this wave, the Jianghu army would not be able to fight anymore. On the other hand, if they could not withstand this wave, the mercenaries would be completely defeated. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Fire as hard as you can. Grenade squad, concentrate all the grenades. When they get close, blast them. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Cold Front, Luo Pa, shouted. At the same time, he ordered the 5 rocket launchers to prepare for attack. Battalion commander, shouldn't we stop for a while? The machine guns used by our 9 squads are all red. If this continues, I'm afraid they will be scrapped. Company Commander Tian Su came to Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin's side and said anxiously. The squad machine guns were their treasures. They could not waste them after just one use. That would be the biggest waste. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin only hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, since that is the case, let's rest the machine guns first. Everyone, switch to the 9-5. Continuous fire style. At the same time, be prepared to retreat. Kong Chuanxin hesitated for a while before saying the last sentence. This battle was indeed enjoyable. However, the Jianghu elites were elites after all. Their fearless charging style had truly frightened them. The distance between them and the Jianghu elites was getting closer and closer. Once they got close, no matter how good they were at fighting, they would not be able to gain the upper hand in a chaotic one-on-one battle. Furthermore, the Cold Vanguard was a treasure. If the Cold Vanguard suffered heavy losses because of this, he wouldn't know how to answer to the others. If that really happened, his position as a battalion commander would come to an end. Company Commander Tian Su hesitated for a moment when he heard Battalion Commander Tian Su say to be prepared to retreat. However, he quickly understood. Retreating did not mean admitting defeat. It was just a strategy. Just like what the 6th young master said, only by preserving one's strength would one be able to effectively defeat the enemy. If one died, then what was the point of fighting? Company Commander Tian Su went to pass on the order. Kong Chuanxin held the 9-5 style in his hand and fired a dozen more bullets. At least a few Jianghu soldiers died under his gun. Even a charging Jianghu war elephant had more than one bullet embedded in its right front leg. It fell to one knee with a loud thud. While the Jianghu soldier on it was flung away, it also brought a lot of resistance to the charging elephants behind it. However, only a small number of elephants fell to the ground. It was not enough to stop the charging momentum of the main force of the Jianghu army. In front of the silver-armored war elephants, the power of the bullets was indeed weakened by a lot. Especially after the number of war elephants reached tens of thousands, the pressure on the mercenaries who only had a little more than 3,000 soldiers with firearms obviously increased. Chapter 533. The rocket launchers were fired, and the war elephants that were hit either fell to the ground or ran away in fear. It did alleviate some of the pressure on the main force of the mercenaries, but it still didn't have much effect on the overall situation. In the rear, Tiger's Mane put down the binoculars in his hand and said to Yang Chendong worriedly, "Young master, the soldiers in front are under a lot of pressure." "Yes, they are under a lot of pressure. But when there is pressure, there is motivation, so that these boys don't have their noses up in the sky every day. They look like they are the boss, the second boss, and the third boss." Yang Chendong said this with a smile. Seeing that the young master could still talk and laugh here, Tiger's Mane couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that the young master had a way to turn the situation around. Okay. Sure enough, when he saw that the war elephants were less than 150 meters away from the cold front, Yang Chendong finally stopped joking. Instead, he said to the first and second guards who were still standing in front of the 5 mortars, "Prepare to fire. Adjust the distance to 50 meters behind the war elephants." Although when the distance was close, the mercenaries still had a wave of grenades in their hands to attack. But if the opponent was only a few hundred war elephants, they could give it a try, but against 20,000, it was a bit insufficient. And if the war elephants really rushed into the mercenaries' team, the consequences would be unimaginable, and it was not something that Yang Chendong wanted to see. The first and second guards who had been waiting anxiously immediately began to operate the mortars. They even had a competition to see who could hit more accurately. In this regard, Yang Chendong naturally crossed his arms and watched the battle from the side. He had already taught the key points of operation to them, and it turned out that these team members also learned very quickly, which made him very relieved. The result of his relief was that when the mortar shells were fired again, they landed on the spot that Yang Chendong pointed out, and then fell into the elephant herd, sending countless elephants flying. The powerful shells were not comparable to rocket launchers, and the direct result was that the elephant herd was in chaos. After all, they were animals, not humans. Although they had all been trained, under the stimulation of the thunderous sound and the fiery light, these war elephants revealed their instincts and began to run in all directions. This caused the Jianghu soldiers near them to suffer, and they became meat paste under the feet of the war elephants. Even the Jianghu soldiers riding on the war elephants didn't fare any better. Faced with the disobedient war elephants, they were either thrown away or directly killed by the shells. Chen Heijin, one of the famous generals of Jianghu, was unfortunately hit by a shell under such circumstances, and it happened to be in the center of the battlefield. His entire body instantly turned into countless pieces, and his original appearance could no longer be seen. There was a saying that success and failure depended on the same person. The hope that they had placed their hopes on had now become the biggest threat. The moment the Jianghu soldiers were mercilessly trampled, it was already announced that the attack had failed. In addition, the mercenaries took this opportunity to launch a frenzied counterattack. Some of the brave soldiers directly rushed out and threw the grenades in their hands forward, causing balls of fire to appear, and then, there was no more and then. The morale of the Jianghu soldiers had been completely extinguished. Even one of the famous generals, Fan Yuhai, saw that the situation was turning for the worse, and led 20,000 elite soldiers to escape in another direction outside the city. As for the soldiers who did not follow General Fan, what they needed to do now was to escape back to Xianxia City. It seemed that this was the only way to ensure their safety. However, at a time like this, where could there be a safe place? It was the same in Xianxia City. After Chen Di led his subordinates and the Chen clansmen to destroy all the catapults in the city, they didn't face the attack of the Jianghu army. Instead, they were ignored and ignored. After the news of the defeat at the front lines had spread, even King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had escaped Xianxia City under the protection of the Crown Prince's 5,000 guards, and were heading towards the commandery city. The king and Crown Prince had escaped, and so had General Fan. General Chen had died in battle, and the soldiers below him were like headless flies. Who would care about what Chen Di was doing? Especially the 100,000 Jianghu soldiers who were waiting at the north and south of the city. They were like abandoned children, and no one cared about them. According to the original plan, when the 100,000 elite Jianghu soldiers charged from the east of the city, the 100,000 soldiers of the Jianghu soldiers would charge out from the north and south gates, and cooperate with the main force to attack the mercenaries' camp. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. However, the moment the mortars were fired, the ordinary Jianghu soldiers were afraid. They didn't want to face death, especially when they knew that in the original plan, they were just scapegoats and shields. It was normal for them to hesitate for a while. It was the hesitation of the generals that caused the soldiers below to react. When the order was given to open the city gates and charge at the mercenaries, they didn't want to do it. It wasn't a collective strike, but at least most of the people with brains stood in place and didn't move. When the generals saw that the soldiers didn't follow their orders, although they were angry, they didn't dare to do anything overboard. Who knew if the soldiers would attack them if they were forced into a corner? It was at this time that news came from the front lines. The main elite force had been defeated, the king and the crown prince had fled, and the catapults that had been placed all over the city in preparation for street battles had been destroyed by Chen Di, Magistrate Chen. It was also said that Magistrate Chen had joined the mercenaries and obtained a certain amount of authority. With so much news spreading, the 100,000 ordinary Jiaoji generals were confused. They had been abandoned and couldn't find a way forward. However, some of the smarter ones sent people to contact Chen Di. They wanted to see if there were any benefits to be gained from joining the mercenaries. It wasn't that these generals didn't have a code of brotherhood, but under the circumstances, this was the best choice. One had to know that the puppet army wasn't just a product of one country. As such, the entire Xianxia city began to fall into internal strife with different thoughts. This chaotic situation lasted for a total of 5 days. During these 5 days, the mercenaries stood guard outside the east gate, showing no intention of entering the city. According to Yang Qindong's words, it was a mess. If they entered now, it would be troublesome. There might even be some unnecessary deaths. He didn't want to see such worthless sacrifices. The mercenaries were all treasures, and even the auxiliary soldiers were future treasures. He didn't want to see any of them die just because they went to clean up a mess that they had already won. Thus, the best way was to wait. He would wait for Chen Di and Yang to clear up the order in the city before entering. Of course, he didn't do anything during these 5 days. There were close to 50,000 captives outside the east gate under his command. These were the elites of Jiaoji. Furthermore, they were made up of strong men and adult men. They were a rich source of manpower. With close to 50,000 captives, the 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries were naturally put to good use. They were in charge of guarding the captives while the auxiliary soldiers were in charge of screening and registration. The mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers were in charge of guarding the captives. The cooperation went smoothly. However, Yang Qindong was dissatisfied that 20,000 captives had escaped. Even the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai, had escaped. Thus, the battle outside the east gate had only killed 30,000 people. However, this was already enough to set the foundation for Jiaoji's downfall. This was because good news had just come from the commandery city. King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who had escaped there, had already snuck into the commandery city. They had been captured alive by Wu Shang, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front 2nd Regiment. Wu Shang had led the 1st Battalion of the main force and 2 auxiliary battalions to fight in the Langsun region. At the peak of the battle, they had faced Chen Heijin's 30,000 black soldiers and Ruan Gongwang's 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers. Even so, Wu Shang and his men weren't at a disadvantage. Relying on their training in the rainforest, superior equipment, and close cooperation, they had killed 20,000 enemies and lost less than 200 men. After seeing Chen Heijin retreat to Xianxia city, the remaining 1,000 men had followed orders to the commandery city. They had quietly infiltrated the city and occupied it without leaving a trace. Only when King Li Li and his men were surrounded did they know that there was no way out. After a series of battles, General Ruan Xiaozhong had been killed, and King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had been captured. This also marked the fall of the Jiaoji kingdom. Just a few days ago, Chan Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, who had defeated 100,000 Lansong soldiers and occupied Yinglu city, had returned. Along with him were 90,000 Lansong soldiers. Suddenly, the number of captives had reached 150,000, and the pressure was not small. Fortunately, there were 45,000 young and knowledgeable people from Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji Nation. Their arrival alleviated the pressure on the captives. They only needed to wait for 2 more days for the Nye Tong regiment to take over the captives, and the situation would be settled. From the time they entered Jiaoji until now, it had only been a month. Counting from the time they entered the Langsun region, it had only been 50 days. The arrogant Jiaoji army that dared to challenge the Great Ming at its peak had been wiped out. Now, other than a few cities that were still guarded by Jiaoji soldiers, Most of the main cities had been taken over by the mercenaries. It could be said that from this moment onwards, Yang Qindong could announce to the world that Jiaoji had been destroyed. 5 days later, Xiyu City was no longer as chaotic as before. After Chen Di asked for instructions, and Yun Ke passed the message, the East City Gate was opened once more, and a large number of Jiaoji soldiers walked out. Chapter 534. Just this number alone amounted to about 100,000. All in all, there were a total of 250,000 adult male captives. Once they were sent to Qiqian City, it would greatly reduce the manpower pressure there. Yang Qindong could finally breathe a sigh of relief. 3 days later, Commander Nie Tong of the Navy led 10,000 men to Xiyu City and began to take over the 250,000 captives. They would be sent out of Jiaoji to Qiqian City in 3 batches. The overall situation was set. Another 3 days later, the envoy from Jiaoji to southern Ming and the Imperial eunuch Kai Gu finally appeared outside Xiyu City. Speaking of which, it was quite tragic. Along the way from Nanjing, they had encountered all sorts of problems. For example, they had encountered horse bandits 5 times and were besieged by disaster victims. Although their lives were not in danger in the end, it had greatly hindered their progress. As such, they had only just arrived outside Xiyu City when they realized that the main army of Jiaoji had been annihilated. Not only that, even the king and crown prince of Jiaoji had been captured alive. They were unable to accept this outcome. They had said that they were here to announce the imperial edict for the Duke of Loyalty to withdraw from Jiaoji. But now, it seemed that they had been dreaming. When Yang Qindong received news of the arrival of Zhu Qijian's envoy, he was waiting in the temporary palace of Xiyu City to meet with Li Li and Li Yuanlong. Thus, when he heard Tiger's Mane's report, he casually said, "Arrange for them to stay in an inn in the city first. It won't be too late to meet them after I'm done with the matters here." This was not Yang Qindong being arrogant. Now that someone had come to beg them, wouldn't they be looked down upon if they did not act appropriately? Tiger's Mane nodded and retreated to handle the matter. At this moment, King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had already been escorted in under the supervision of a few members of the First Guard. Along with them was the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Lung Feng Regiment, Wu Shang. Wu Shang could be considered to have started following Yang Qindong rather early. He had been by Yang Qindong's side ever since they were in the Yang residence in northern Ming's capital. Although they were both battalion commanders, there was still a difference in their relationship. This Wu Shang belonged to the category that was closer to the 6th young master. For example, although in terms of official position, he was not as high as 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa, but in terms of personal friendship, there were some things that Luo Pa could not casually say, but Wu Shang could. "Thank you for your hard work," Yang Qindong said with a smile when he saw Wu Shang, who was wearing a camouflage uniform and had the insignia of a major. "Not at all." A silly smile appeared on Wu Shang's face, but it quickly turned into a serious expression. The 6th young master could joke with him, but he did not have the right to joke with the 6th young master. Especially as the Yang clan system continued to grow, the distance between the two would only grow further and further. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Wu Shang's performance. He liked people who knew their limits when doing things, and only such people could be trusted. Those who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth when they came to power obviously would not have much of a future. When his gaze shifted from Wu Shang to Li Li and Li Yuanlong, Yang Qindong could not help but chuckle. Yang Qindong did not know what King Li Li had been like in the past. However, Yang Qindong had personally seen what Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was like. But now, in comparison, he was no longer as high-spirited as he was that day. His hair was hanging upside down, falling messily on his face. Although his clothes still looked like high-end goods, they were wrinkled, especially with a few shoe prints on them. With one look, one could imagine what kind of treatment he had received. It could be said that at this moment, there was no trace of the Crown Prince's demeanor on Li Yuanlong. It was not strange for people who did not know him to treat him as a beggar. Yang Qindong chuckled emotionally, but in the ears of Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son pair, it was indeed a great mockery. The two immediately widened their eyes and looked like they couldn't wait to eat Yang Qindong. "Bastard! Kneel down when you see the Duke of Loyalty." Beta Persei, who had been standing next to Yang Qindong, happened to see the unfriendly look in the eyes of the father and son and immediately roared. It was appropriate to say that it was a roar. Beta Persei's voice was very loud, and now that he was angry, his chi came out from his dantian. It was no different from a beast's howl. Just this shout scared Li Li and Li Yuanlong so much that they knelt on the ground. Of course, this was also due to the efforts of the members of the first guard squad behind them. In the eyes of the first guard squad, Beta Persei and Tiger's Mane often represented the sixth young master. The one who was hurt the most by this roar was Yang Chendong, who was sitting in front of him. Fortunately, the chi that had appeared in his body at some unknown time had greatly protected him. That was why he was only startled and not injured. But he could not help but rub his ears first, then turned back to glare at Beta Persei until he saw the other party smile a little embarrassedly. Then, he turned his head again and looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong. When the father and son glared at him just now, Yang Chendong didn't detect any killing intent from them. This could only prove that the two of them were really afraid. They just wanted to puff themselves up at their own cost. They just wanted to prove their existence and status. To be more specific, it was a bit of a show of strength but cowardice at heart. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong did not care about such little tricks. Not to mention that they were already prisoners. Even if they still had their original identities, he would never be afraid. Li Yuanlong, do you still remember our conversation that night? Yang Chendong finally spoke after looking at the father and son with a scrutinizing gaze. Yes, I remember. Li Yuanlong seemed to suddenly think of something. Then a trace of confusion appeared in his eyes, and then his whole body could not help but tremble. That night, Yang Chendong once said to him that if the father and son were willing to take the initiative to surrender, although they would lose their power, they would still be safe for the rest of their lives. But if they did not surrender, then they could only choose death. At that time, these conditions were indeed difficult to accept in his ears. But now, the overall situation was set, and they had really become Yang Chendong's prisoners. How could they not be afraid when they thought of this matter? As if to prove what he said at the beginning, Yang Chendong suddenly swung his long arm, and two flashing golden throwing knives flew out, then landed at the feet of Li Li and Li Yuanlong. The position was only a fist away from their feet. Their eyes lit up. Other than the father and son, the other people in the hall looked at Yang Chendong with eyes full of admiration. Not for anything else but just because of the beautiful throwing knife skill. This was something they could not do even if they were beaten to death. They could throw the throwing knife but they would not throw it so far, a distance of 40 meters, and they would not throw it so accurately. Of course, if they knew that the person involved was not satisfied with this skill. Yang Chendong was still thinking in his heart that he was still not mature and skilled in using chi. He originally aimed at the feet of the other party. Thinking about it, if the two throwing knives landed less than an inch in front of the feet, what kind of situation would it be? In this way, Yang Chendong thought that he still had to work hard to cultivate. He believed that with the existence of chi, as long as he continued to work hard, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. Ignoring the admiring eyes of others, Yang Chendong looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son, and said in an emotionless voice, "Since you are the first country I destroyed, I will give you a chance. Only one of you can live, you can choose." What was cruel? Presumably, this was cruel. Only one of the father and son could live, or let them choose for themselves. Most likely, anyone would hesitate when faced with such a question. They would be conflicted, and they might even be unable to stop themselves from cursing. Fortunately, Li Li and Li Yuanlong were not ordinary people. One of them was the king of a country, the other was the crown prince of a country, the future king. How could they be measured by the standards of ordinary people? Just like now, the two of them only hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking a throwing knife each. Li Li was already more than 60 years old. After experiencing this kind of torment, his face looked very old. So when he took the throwing knife, he shook his head, then put the throwing knife on the ground and began to cry. Woo woo woo. It was hard to imagine what kind of feeling a 60-year-old man would give when he cried. It was hard to describe, but a sense of sadness involuntarily spread out. Longer, I've let you down. I wasn't able to leave you a good family business. Now that I'm over 60 years old, I've lived long enough. Come kill me. This way, you can live for a few more years. I just hope that every year on this day, you won't forget to burn some joss paper for me. Li Li was like a child who realized that he had lost his way. At this moment, Li Li completely opened his heart and cried bitterly. Originally, he had already clenched the throwing knife in his hand and was ready to fight to the death with his father, but he did not expect to see this scene. At this moment, Li Yuanlong did not know what to do. He only hesitated for a moment, then called out loudly and hugged his father. Although in his heart, he hated his father for provoking such a strong enemy like the mercenaries, causing him to lose his hope of succeeding the throne. But no matter what, this was his father, right? Now, he was willing to die to help him live, just by giving him a hug. No matter how he looked at it, it was only right. Chapter 535. For a moment, the father and son hugged each other and cried bitterly. Everyone was confused by this scene. It should be noted that not only were Yang Chendong and the others in the hall, but also Hong Jin and Chen Di, who seemed to have surrendered to the mercenaries, as well as Prime Minister Ruan Chunqing and the others. They were all watching from the side. When they saw that Yang Chendong only gave the father and son the choice to live, they couldn't help but lower their heads. As former officials, of course, they didn't want to see this scene happen, but now, the initiative was not in their hands. So what if they couldn't bear it? What followed was another scene of a father-son relationship, which really moved everyone to tears. Even Ruan Chunqing was considering whether to stand up and plead for leniency. Although this may be useless and would anger the loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty, if he didn't do this, he would feel guilty. Just when Prime Minister Ruan Chunqing was still thinking about how to speak, the scene suddenly changed. A flying dagger suddenly appeared between the two people who were still hugging each other. Then blood splattered. The two people separated immediately after the dagger touched each other. The sudden change of scene made many people unable to figure out what happened. It wasn't until they saw the young Li Yuanlong with a throwing knife in his chest that everyone was surprised and suddenly realized that Li Li had made his move. Yes, Li Li made a move. Just when his son was crying out of gratitude, he took the knife from his son's hand out of kindness and looked like he was going to commit suicide. It seemed that he was helping his son to make a decision. After all, patricide was a big crime. However, no one expected that the flying knife would turn around and stab the unsuspecting Li Yuanlong in the chest. Then the two separated. The flying dagger pierced his chest where his heart was. Blood spurted out and landed on Lily's old face. It made him look even more terrifying and frightening. "Father, why?" With both hands covering his bleeding chest, Li Yuanlong's face was puzzled and full of disbelief. He stared fiercely at his father, Li Li, as if he wanted an answer. Unfortunately, Li Li didn't say anything. He was an ambitious and ruthless person, and could be considered half an outstanding person. Anyone like him was extremely thick-skinned. But at this moment, he really didn't know what to say because everything was his fault. In order to survive, he didn't hesitate to use his son's life as a stepping stone. With so many people looking at him, he probably wouldn't have the face to see anyone in the future. But even though he knew there would be such a consequence, he still couldn't help but make the first move. Moreover, he had used such underhanded methods. Everything was because he didn't want to die. He was afraid of death. Don't think that some people are overbearing and act high and mighty. Usually, he would kill people without batting an eyelid and take their lives as if it were child's play. But usually, such people were very afraid of death. This was because they didn't know what they would face after death. That feeling of the unknown terrified them. Especially after they were used to controlling everything, death was their taboo. In particular, the older they got, the more fearful they felt. This was why many kings were very wise when they were young, but when they were old, they would study things like longevity. They knew it was impossible, but they had to do it. Li Li didn't want to die, so the one to die was Li Yuanlong. So what if this person was his son? At least he survived, right? As for whether his actions would cause others to hate him, he didn't care. In his opinion, since Yang Chendong had set the rules, as long as they followed the rules, it would be fine. As for the result, Yang Chendong would definitely admit it. Otherwise, it would be a slap in the face in front of everyone. Those who truly wanted to do great things wouldn't do such a thing. Li Yuanlong glared at his father with unwillingness. In the end, because he had lost too much blood, he fell to the ground with a plop and died with his eyes closed. Seeing all of this, the people at the side, including Ruan Chunqing, had a trace of hatred and confusion in their eyes. They suddenly looked down on their former king. On the other hand, Yang Chendong was just as Li Li had expected. He wasn't surprised at all. In fact, Before Li Li was about to act, he had already felt it. Yes, he had indeed felt it. All of this was due to the qi in his body. It was that qi that told him that Li Li had killing intent, but Li Yuanlong didn't, so the result was already within his expectations. In fact, for Yang Chendong, he didn't care who lived or died. Just as Li Li thought, it was fine as long as they played within the rules of his game. Of course, he was more or less shocked that Li Yuanlong had personally killed his son. Perhaps this was the nature of an ambitious and ruthless person. Very good, Li Li, you win. From now on, no one will make things difficult for you. You can still live well. Of course, don't think about power and freedom. You will be sent to a very safe place. You won't have to worry about food and drink. If your former subordinates want to see you, they will be able to do so after they apply for permission. I only want to remind you of one thing. Don't think about unrealistic problems. Otherwise, no son will be willing to take the blame for you next time. After giving a definition to this matter and setting a rule for Li Li's life, Yang Chendong waved his hand. Then, Ba Daojiang, Pang Yu, and a few other guards came forward to take Li Li away. Li Yuanlong's corpse was also taken away. After dealing with the Li father and son, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Ruan Chunqing. Hong Jin, listen to my orders. Yes, sir. Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop, looking very pious. I appoint Hong Jin as the general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. He will command 15,000 soldiers. Chen Di, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 10,000 soldiers. Ruan Chunqing, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 5,000 soldiers. As soon as he opened his mouth, he appointed 3 people. As the first 2 people, Hong Jin and Chen Di were naturally excited and happy. At least they would be able to live and have a certain amount of power. Compared to many of the ministers of Jiaoji, their outcome was the best. However, the last person to be named, Ruan Chunqing, stood there without moving for a long time after hearing Yang Chendong call his name. What? You're not willing? Seeing that Ruan Chunqing didn't say anything, Yang Chendong raised his voice as if he was questioning Ruan Chunqing. This. I don't have to die? Why would you forgive me and give me such an important task? Ruan Chunqing was confused. Obviously, he did not understand Yang Chendong's decision. He had originally thought that he was going to die for sure, and he had even mentally prepared himself for it. However, who would have thought that not only was he innocent, but he was also given great power? Because you have the ability. I'm interested in your ability. There are still some places in Jiaoji that are in chaos. I hope that you can step in and calm them down so that fewer people die. I think you can do it and you're willing to do it, right? Yang Chendong pointed out the reason why he wanted to put Ruan Chunqing in an important position. Although Ruan Chunqing did not contribute much, he did not do anything wrong either. It was his original identity that forced him to go against the Jiaoji mercenary army. There was no personal grudge between them. Furthermore, he was able to become the prime minister of Jiaoji. Even a formidable person like Lily approved of him. No one would believe that he did not have the ability. If he dared to put Lily in an important position, why wouldn't Yang Chendong do the same? Not to mention, Hong Jin and Chen Di were suppressing him from above, so there wouldn't be any problems. Of course, the main reason why Yang Chendong wanted to use Ruan Chunqing was because he knew that Ruan Chunqing was talented and capable. In the past, Jiaoji was his enemy. When he wanted to kill and destroy, he would not show any mercy. But now, this place had become his sphere of influence. Naturally, he had to change his mindset. How to quickly settle down and prosper here, and then use this place to influence other places and expand the influence and strength of the mercenary army was the most important thing. To achieve this, Hong Jin and Chen Di were not enough. On the other hand, Ruan Chunqing could do it as long as he worked hard. Ruan Chunqing could not immediately see through Yang Chendong's intentions, but he was still impressed by his magnanimity. Since ancient times, there was a saying that a gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Even if he did not care about this favor, he had to accept this task for the sake of the Ruan clan's descendants. Otherwise, if he angered Yang Chendong, not only would he die, but the Ruan clan would also suffer. Thud. Ruan Chunqing knelt on the ground. He did it willingly. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. Chunqing will do my best. Only death awaits. Good, get up. I don't want you to die. Speaking of which, if you become my subordinate, you should live a better life. I have the ability to give you that. Of course, if anyone still has other tricks up their sleeves, don't blame me for being merciless once it's discovered. Yang Qindong's face couldn't help but become serious when he said the last part. I hate it when people betray me. If anyone dares to do so, they will suffer a fate worse than death. We don't dare, Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Wan Chunqing said in unison. Taking advantage of this situation, Yang Qindong nodded his head and handed the matter of pacifying the other parts of Jiaoji to the three of them. Presumably, with these 30,000 men and the influence of the mercenaries, there shouldn't be any resistance in Jiaoji. Chapter 536. As the three of them left, another young man was brought into the hall. As soon as the young man entered the hall, he knelt down in front of Yang Qindong and greeted him. The person who came was none other than one of the first students of the Yang Chandong Academy. He was also one of Yang Qindong's disciples, Chang Qianhao. The Chang family was a wealthy family. Not only was their family wealthy, but their businesses were spread all over the Jiangnan area. There were also some officials in the family who had a close relationship with the southern Ming Empire. As the leader of the younger generation of the Chang family, Chang Qianhao had already shown himself in the family and had a certain status. However, he was not a satisfied person. Especially after he went to the capital of Baiming and saw the power of the immortal abode and sky beyond sky, he worshipped the person behind all of this, Yang Qindong. Later, when the Yang Family Academy enrolled students, he signed up and became one of its members. Later, because of his excellent performance in business, he became one of Yang Qindong's disciples. After graduation, he returned to the Chang family in Jiangnan and did a lot of things for Yang Qindong, making the Chang family more powerful in Jiangnan's business. Chang Qianhao was also regarded by the older generation of the Chang family as one of the most promising people to inherit the family business. This time, he was summoned to Jiaoji because Yang Qindong wanted to develop business here. The Chang family's influence in the southern Ming Empire's business circle was not small. This was where he needed to rely heavily, which led to the current scene. Qianhao, your body has grown stronger. Not bad, get up. Looking at the disciple kneeling on the ground, his skin seemed to have become darker. Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction and then pointed to a chair in front of him. He did not dare to refuse an elder's gift. Although Yang Qindong was only a few months older than Chang Qianhao, the idea of a teacher for a day, a father for life was very popular at that time and was the most orthodox existence. Chang Qianhao sat in front of Yang Qindong with a trembling look. Don't be nervous. I called you over this time because I have something for you to do. Teacher is planning to start a business with Jiaoji as the center. He will start selling some of the Realm Beyond Heaven's products here and then sell them to the Southern Ming Dynasty and the nearby countries. How about it? Do you have the confidence to do this well? Yang Qindong said with a smile. Even though Baiming already had a Heavens Beyond trading company, transportation in ancient times wasn't very developed. When some goods were shipped to Southern Ming, or even Jiaoji, the price would rise quite a bit due to transportation issues. This wasn't beneficial for the quick sale of some goods in Crimson City. That was why he had decided to build a second commercial center around Jiaoji. This way, not only would he be able to prosper Jiaoji and restore its prosperity, he would also be able to earn more money and increase the flow of goods. Why not? Chang Qianhao had already thought of the reason before he had come. As for people saying that Jiaoji was still Jiaoji and that Yang Qindong's words didn't necessarily have the final say, he didn't think too much about it. With his trust in his teacher, he naturally didn't need to worry about the safety of his teacher. As expected, when he arrived at Jiaoji, everything had changed. The originally huge country had now become Yang Qindong's territory. If this happened to anyone else, they would definitely be shocked. However, when it was related to Yang Qindong, Chang Qianhao felt that it couldn't be any simpler. If someone really went to the Yang Family Academy and listened to Yang Qindong's lectures, they would know that this young teacher really knew everything from astronomy to geography. It was as if there was nothing he didn't know and nothing he couldn't understand. It wasn't strange for someone like this to be able to do anything because he possessed such magic and ability. Teacher, this student will definitely do his best and won't disappoint you, said Chang Qianhao excitedly. Although Yang Qindong hadn't mentioned what benefits he would give him from the start, Sometimes it was best to not mention it. For example, when selling things to different places, there would always be a problem with the ratio, and there would always be a problem with the distributor. Yang Qindong didn't specify who would give him the benefits, so how this cake would be divided, wouldn't it all be up to him? This was an opportunity to indirectly strengthen the Chong family. As long as he was slightly biased towards the Chong family and those who were on good terms with the Chong family, wouldn't he have everything? Of course, it would only be limited to a little manipulation, and he couldn't go overboard. Moreover, the Chong family would have to pay the price as well. Otherwise, no one could imagine the consequences of angering his teacher. If that day really came, it would be hard to say whether the entire Chong family would still exist. The conversation with Chong Qianhao soon ended. After all, Yang Qindong had a lot of things to do. He only needed to point out a way to do business, and the people below should know how to do it. His main focus was still on dealing with major issues. What was a major issue? Of course, it was how to deal with the relationship between Southern Ming, Bai Ming, and the Min King. The reason why the Min King was placed in the same position as Southern Ming and Bai Ming. That was because Yang Qindong didn't mean to be enemies with the Min King. On the contrary, he had to find a way to balance these three forces as much as possible. Only in this way, they wouldn't point their spears at him, and he would have the opportunity to develop his own territory and do what he wanted to do. Beta Persei. Prepare the meal. In the afternoon, I will meet with the envoys from Southern Ming. After all, they represent Ying's sect, so it wouldn't be good to neglect them too much. After dealing with these matters in the morning, Yang Qindong stretched his back and stood up. Compared to Yang Qindong's satisfaction, the Imperial eunuch Kai Gu, who was entrusted by Ying's sect's Zhu Qizhen to come to Jianghu to announce the edict, was not in the mood to eat or drink. Initially, he thought that he was here as a representative of Ying Zong to mediate the war in Jianghu with a transcendent status. Thinking about it, with the war in a stalemate, both sides had probably suffered heavy losses, but no one wanted to take a step back. At this time, his appearance could give them a way out, and he would definitely be welcomed by everyone. In fact, it would be reasonable for them to seek some benefits for the Southern Ming Empire. This was also the reason why his uncle Kai Zhong worked hard to get this job for him. Ying sect's Zhu Qizhen was a person who remembered what he had eaten but not what he had beaten. Because of Wang Zhan, Tu Mu was defeated and he almost lost the throne. However, after establishing himself in Nanjing, he still reactivated the eunuch group. However, even though they were all eunuchs, their identities were different. For example, the eunuchs around Ying's sect had several factions. Other than Mao Mu, who mainly served Empress Qian, there were also Chao Jixiang, Qian Xingbao, and Kai Zhong. Regarding the emergence of these eunuch factions, Zhu Qizhen had always been looking for a way to balance them. He didn't want to let one faction become too big, but he also didn't want to let one faction be suppressed to the point where they couldn't survive. However, no matter what he did, it was difficult to balance a bowl of water. In comparison, Kai Zhong's faction was originally weak. Perhaps it was because Zhu Qizhen saw this point that he gave the task of announcing the edict to Kai Zhong's nephew, Kai Gu. Along the way, Kai Gu had been imagining what kind of identity he would have when he arrived in Jianghu, and what kind of awe-inspiring appearance he would have. However, in reality, the closer he got to the land of Jianghu, the more complicated his thoughts became. Along the way, all he heard was news of the defeat of the Jianghu army. When he arrived at Hanoi, the capital of Jianghu, he heard about the battle at Xiyu City. The Jianghu army had suffered a great defeat, and even the country's ruler had fled. It was beyond Kai Ji's expectations that the battle would come to an end in such a short time. As such, along the way from Hanoi to Xiyu City, most of the Jianghu envoys who were following him had fled. Perhaps they were afraid of being implicated. Others could leave, but Kai Gu couldn't. Otherwise, not only would he implicate his uncle, but he would also have nowhere to go. What awaited him was the pursuit of the Eastern faction guards and the embroidered uniform guards. Bracing himself, he finally arrived at Xiyu City. Before he even entered the city, he saw several Jingguan. There were the 5,000 Jianghu Jingguan from before, as well as the 30,000 Jianghu Jingguan after the battle. When he saw the huge Jingguan from afar, Kai Gu couldn't help but feel his legs go weak. His scalp went numb, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He knew that his mission this time wouldn't be easy to complete. Regardless of his feelings, Kai Gu still made his way to Xiyu City. Indeed, he was warmly received, and only then did he feel better. When he was informed that the Duke of Loyalty would meet him in the afternoon, he began to ponder about how he should speak and complete his mission. Before he could think of anything, another piece of news came, disrupting Kai Ji's calm mind. The king of Jianghu and the crown prince had been captured by Yang Chendong. Not only that, the king of Jianghu even killed his young son in front of everyone in order to survive. Naturally, Kai Ge wouldn't doubt the authenticity of this news. After all, the ones who spread this news were some of the old officials of Jianghu, and it was said that they had witnessed it with their own eyes. If this news was true, then there was a problem. Jianghu had already been destroyed. Wouldn't it be ridiculous for him to appear here as the mediator of the war? While he was in a daze, someone came to see him, saying that the Duke of Loyalty wanted to meet him. With incomparable nervousness, Kai Ge came to a courtyard and saw the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty playing with goldfish beside a pond in the garden. Chapter 537. Southern Ming Special Envoy Kai Ge greets the Duke of Loyalty. When they were still 3 feet away, Kai Ge stopped under the signal of the guard on the side and said, "Okay. Let him come over." Yang Chendong didn't turn his head, but his voice was clearly heard. Not to mention that a small Kai Ge didn't have the ability to do anything to him. Even if he had such ability, his ki would become stronger and stronger. Why should he be afraid of him? "Go over, but be careful." Pang Yu, who was guarding here, looked at Kai Ge coldly and reminded him coldly. Another team member standing on the side, Ba Daojiang, casually glanced over here, then turned around and began to observe the surrounding movements. He felt that it was interesting for his comrade Pang Yu to scare people like this, but he knew that his duty was still to guard the safety of this place. Although Xiyu City was occupied by the mercenaries, it didn't mean that it was safe here. In the past few days, there were more than a dozen assassination attempts aimed at the 6th young master. Although they were all daunting but not dangerous, this didn't mean that they could be careless. As for Kai Ge, in the face of Pang Yu's reminder, he had to show a flattering smile, then walked over to Yang Chendong's side. This time, he didn't need anyone to remind him. When he was 3 meters away, he took the initiative to stand there. At this time, Yang Chendong just finished sprinkling the fish food in his hand, then turned around, walked to the pavilion on the side, and sat down. He pointed at Kai Ge and said, "You also sit down, after all. You represent the emperor, you can't lose your identity." Yang Chendong had to add the last sentence, otherwise, Kai Ge wouldn't have the courage to sit down. If this was the case, once the news spread out, it was inevitable that people would say that he didn't respect the Southern Ming emperor. He wouldn't take such a blame. Seeing that Yang Chendong's attitude was good, Kai Ge breathed a sigh of relief, then sat down opposite him. "Say it, what are you here for?" After waiting for Kai Ge to sit down, Yang Chendong asked, then looked at Kai Ge with interest. This kind of gaze was very similar to looking at animals in the zoo. Kai Ge also felt like he was being watched. He really didn't like this side of him and really wanted to say something. However, after thinking about it, he still held it in. It wasn't for any other reason than the fact that the person sitting across from him was too powerful. It was far beyond what he could resist, and it would only complicate matters. Since his identity was a little too weak, then he should just say whatever he wanted to say and focus on completing the mission. As for the embarrassment, it was better not to fuss about it. Duke of Loyalty and Courage. This one is here on the Emperor's orders to urge the mercenaries to stop fighting with Jianghu. I just didn't expect. Without waiting for Kai Ge to continue, Yang Chendong interrupted. "You didn't expect the war to end so quickly, did you?" "Yes." Kai Ge nodded, and then said according to what he thought at noon. "The mercenaries led by Duke of Loyalty and Courage are indeed very powerful. To be able to wipe out the main force of the Jianghu army so quickly, this is something that no one expected." Kai Ge first praised Yang Chendong and the mercenaries' strength, but then his expression changed slightly as he shook his head and said, "It's just that killing people is just a small matter. After all, King Li is the king of Annan personally conferred by the Great Ming. If the Duke of Loyalty and Courage killed him just like that, how would others look at our emperor? Why don't we stop the war and let King Li compensate the mercenaries with some gold and silver, so that they can learn a lesson?" Looking at Kai Ji's face, Yang Chendong really wanted to spit on Kai Ji's face and say no. However, since it was a negotiation, He had to know what the other party wanted. As such, he did not immediately get angry and pretended to listen. He nodded and said, Please continue. Yang Chendong didn't object, which made Kai go happy in his heart. When he spoke again, his face had a little more confidence. If Jiaoji can stop the war, this is naturally something that the emperor and all of the great Ming people want to see. However, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage can lead the army up north and wipe out the Min King's rebel army, returning peace to the southern Ming, I'm afraid that Duke of Loyalty and Courage will be recorded in the history books. This is something that will go down in history. Of course, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage feels that it is difficult, that is not a problem. As long as you support the southern Ming with tens of millions of silver to train the new army, the effect will be the same. That's right. This silver can be considered a loan from the southern Ming to Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In order to express his gratitude to Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the emperor will definitely agree to give you the title of prince. In the future, as long as Baiming agrees, this matter can be accomplished. As such, I'm afraid that the next time I see Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I will have to address you as prince. Just thinking about it makes others envious, he. Kai Gu was laughing, and Yang Chendong was also laughing after hearing this. They wanted him to withdraw his troops, and they also wanted him to fork out money. What he would get in return was an empty title of a prince. Moreover, this title still required the approval of the Northern Ming Empire. In the end, it was tantamount to not having any promises. He really did not know if there was something wrong with Kai Ji's head or if Zhu Qizhen was treating him like a 3-year-old child. Did he really think that he would give him whatever he wanted just by casually coaxing and saying a few nice words? It was truly laughable. He. Both of them were laughing, but as they laughed, Kai Gu could not laugh anymore. This was because he found that Yang Chendong was sneering, and there was a trace of anger in his eyes. A murderous aura unconsciously wrapped around his body, as if he was being stared at by a wild beast. It made it difficult for him to breathe. Cold sweat unknowingly began to flow from his forehead. It must be said that Kai Gu was also a person who knew martial arts. Normally, it would be difficult for 3 to 5 men to get close to him. If he had a long sword, he could even fight against 7 or 8 people. However, he did not know why, but when facing Yang Chendong, he found that he did not even have the strength to raise his arm. Did Emperor Ingzong say these words? After an unknown amount of time, Yang Chendong finally spoke again. When he spoke, the pressure suddenly decreased by a lot. At least, Kai Gu felt that it was not so difficult to breathe. Just now, he really felt that if he continued, he was afraid that even breathing would be a problem. That was equivalent to walking through the gates of hell. He definitely did not want to experience that kind of feeling a second time. Of course, this was also Yang Chendong's intention. Just now, he deliberately mobilized the qi in his body in order to try and see how much pressure it could bring to Kai Gu. Now, it seemed that he was very satisfied with the result. One must know that he only used less than 70% of his qi to make the other party unable to move. It could be imagined that if he used his full strength, the other party would only be lying on the ground now. This was only the effect of targeting a single person. If he wanted to deal with a group of people, the effect would be greatly reduced. Fortunately, he could feel that the qi in his body had been growing stronger ever since it appeared out of nowhere. He believed that as long as he guided it well, it would only become more and more powerful in the future. Given enough time, it shouldn't be a problem for him to deal with a group of people. This is the emperor's intention. Even though he felt immense pressure, Kai Gu did not forget the rules. As he spoke, he even cupped his hands in the air to show his respect to the emperor. Then, do you think that there is any meaning in saying all this now? Of course, Yang Chendong knew that this was Ingzong's intention. Otherwise, how would a small eunuch like him dare to do such a thing on his own? However, he still asked the question because he wanted to put the pressure on Kai Gu. Under the pressure, the might of the qi was naturally displayed. Kai Gu shook his head. To be honest, I'm afraid that no one would expect the mercenary army to be so powerful that the Duke of Loyalty could pacify the Jiaoji army in such a short time. Looking at it this way, these requests are somewhat inappropriate. Kai Gu also knew that when he said those words, he was going against the emperor's orders. But there was no other way. The situation was stronger than the person, not to mention that Yang Chendong was sitting opposite him. After what happened just now, he was really afraid that if he said something wrong, Yang Chendong would directly kill him. even though killing the emperor's envoy was a huge matter, and it was normal for people to view it as a rebellion. It was even more normal for one's entire family to be executed. However, this also depended on who it was. With Yang Qindong and the powerful mercenaries behind him, he did not believe that Emperor Ingzong would be willing to offend people and avenge him for an imperfect person like him. Even if he did avenge him, so what? His own people were already dead, so there was no point in saying those things, right? Seeing that Kai Gu was still sensible, Yang Qindong nodded his head in satisfaction. He also intentionally retracted his aura so that Kai Gu would not feel so pressured. Then he said, "It's impossible to retreat from Jiaoji. Let's put it this way, when the war has reached this stage, it's no longer up to me to decide. The leader of the mercenary army has already started to interfere. He has set his sights on Jiaoji and wants to take it for himself. Of course, if Emperor Ingzong is unhappy, he can send troops to fight. I won't object to this." After deciding on the direction of the formation, Yang Qindong said, "Maybe you don't know, but if it wasn't for me, the mercenary army's target would not be Jiaoji, but the entire Great Ming dynasty. You can also see how powerful the mercenary army is. They have such strength now." When he heard Yang Qindong say that the mercenary army's target was the Great Ming dynasty, Kai Gu was indeed a little afraid. If it was the Great Ming dynasty a few years ago, which was the Great Ming dynasty that had not experienced the changes of the earth and wood, it could still be said that they could wrestle with the mercenary army. After all, they did not have anything else, but they had a large territory and a large population. But now, the Great Ming dynasty was divided into north and south, and now there was the addition of Prince Min's forces. Emperor Ingzong himself was in a terrible fix. If the mercenary army joined in, the consequences could be imagined. Chapter 538. Thinking about the current situation of the Southern Ming Empire, Kai Gu couldn't help but feel short of breath. At this point, the initiative was completely in Yang Qindong's hands. Seeing that Kai Gu didn't speak anymore and sighed as if he had accepted his fate, Yang Qindong smiled in his heart. Some people were like this, always thinking that they were the emperor and everyone should listen to them. But once they met a tough opponent, their attitude would immediately change. Perhaps this was the human instinct to bully the weak and fear the strong. However, Yang Qindong wouldn't pity Ingzong because he already saw that such a person wouldn't be able to lead the Han people to the peak of the world. Since others couldn't do it, then he would leave everything to him. Yang Qindong already had an idea in his heart. When he talked about some things, his tone naturally wouldn't be polite. Speaking of the Battle of Jiaoji, it isn't over yet. The captured King Li Li has already said that the person who sent people to assassinate me was his subordinate, Fan Yuhai. This time, this person escaped and went to the Lansong Kingdom. If I don't catch this person, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. Therefore, the mercenaries will probably send troops to the Lansong Kingdom. Of course, unless they are willing to send Fan Yuhai's head. If they want to cover it up, there will be a huge battle. Of course, this matter shouldn't have anything to do with the Southern Ming Empire. This Duke is telling you this because I hope that when you meet the Emperor, you can tell him what the mercenaries are going to do next. Just let him know in his heart what to do next. This was clearly reminding Kai Gu that not only would the mercenaries not listen to Ingzong's orders, but they would also continue to fight. As for when the fight would end, it was hard to say. Just like now, they sent troops to the Lansong Kingdom with the excuse of finding the culprit, Fan Yuhai. Who knew what kind of excuse they would use next time? After all, they could always find a reason to do so. In other words, if they were willing, the mercenary army could continue to expand endlessly until one day, when their strength grew, they might even come to the Great Ming Empire to cause trouble. He thought that if the mercenary army really cleaned up these small countries one by one, and finally integrated their strength, then at that time, there would be no difference between them and the Great Ming Empire. Then, wouldn't the Great Ming Empire be in danger? Kai Ji's expression was constantly changing as he hurriedly said, "Loyal Duke, don't be anxious. Since Fan Yuhai wants to make a move on Loyal Duke, he is courting death. Dealing with him is something that should be done. However, every grievance had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. They would just have to look for whoever was responsible for it." The Lansong Kingdom has always followed the lead of the Great Ming Empire. At the same time, they are also one of the vassal states of our Great Ming Empire. I believe that as long as we reason with them and move them emotionally, They will definitely not cover up the existence of Fan Yuhai. Please give them some time to deal with this matter properly. I can try my best to help with this. After all, I am also a citizen of the great Ming dynasty. However, you should also know that we cannot delay for too long. If we delay for too long, once the leader of the mercenary army gets angry, I don't know what will happen. Yang Qindong nodded. He originally didn't have the intention to make a move on the Lansong kingdom immediately. It wasn't that he didn't have sufficient military strength, but if he didn't consolidate his rear, it would be easy for problems to arise. Right now, he needed to focus on how to turn Jiaoji into his rear base. Only after this base was stabilized, then he would proceed to the next step of expansion. Of course, if someone wanted to show off like a clown, then he wouldn't hold back. Naturally, other people wouldn't be able to see his thoughts, so he needed to use this opportunity to pressure the Southern Ming Empire and Yingzong. At the same time, it was also a method to numb the Southern Ming Empire. He wanted to create a misconception that the strength of the mercenary army was limited. It was already very difficult for them to conquer Jiaoji, let alone the Lansong kingdom. This way, the Southern Ming Empire might look down on the mercenary army, and this would create more time for him to develop. The matter regarding Jiaoji was settled just like that. In short, he couldn't return the money, and he believed that Yingzong would accept this fact. However, there was nothing he could do even if Yingzong didn't accept it. Would he really bring his troops over? Putting aside whether he had the strength to do so, if he really dared to do so, Min King and Bai Ming would definitely use this opportunity to deal with him. By then, the Southern Ming Empire could only become history and disappear from the stage. After settling the matter of Jiaoji, Yang Qindong brought up the matter of Yingzong wanting to borrow money. Envoy Kai, it's not impossible for the Southern Ming Empire to borrow money, but there are two conditions. Kai Gu originally thought that with Yang Qindong's domineering attitude, he wouldn't be able to get the money. Now that he suddenly heard this, Kai Gu perked up. Please speak, Duke of Loyalty. First, the Yang family bank has to enter the Southern Ming Empire and set up branches in some of the bigger cities. Only then can we better allocate the money and work for the Southern Ming Empire. Second, even if we borrow money with collateral, we don't know what the Southern Ming Empire will be willing to pay. If we don't have anything, this matter won't be easy to handle. Don't you think so? Yang Qindong looked at Kai Gu with a deadpan expression, as if he was doing business. As for the first condition, Kai Gu really couldn't say anything about the Yang family bank entering the Southern Ming Empire. After all, if you wanted to ask someone for help, then it was normal for their bank to enter your territory. Not to mention, it was under the guise of working for the Southern Ming Empire, so there was even less reason to reject it. As for the second condition, Kai Gu really didn't think about it. In his opinion, the emperor was giving you face by asking you to borrow money. Why would he ask for collateral? Of course, he wouldn't say such thoughts in front of Yang Qindong. Who knew if it would anger him? The feeling of being unable to breathe had not completely subsided, and he didn't want to feel it again. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Kai Gu asked, "Then I don't know what kind of collateral the Southern Ming Empire needs to pay if they want to get the money?" "What kind of collateral do you have?" Yang Qindong didn't fall into the other party's trap. Instead, he held the initiative and asked back. Originally, Kai Gu wanted to wait for Yang Qindong to speak first and see what the other party liked. This way he could bargain properly. However, he didn't expect that the other party would kick the question back to him. Instead, it made him fall into deep thought. Speaking of which, the matter of borrowing money with collateral was a common occurrence in the Ming Empire. Things like fields, houses, antiques from home, and women's jewelry were all common collateral. Even pawnshops were willing to accept these things in exchange for money to give to others. However, this time, the Southern Ming Empire didn't need tens of thousands of silver, but tens of millions of silver. In the face of such a large amount, ordinary items naturally wouldn't be enough. This made things difficult for Kai Gu. He really didn't know what to do. Naturally, Kai Gu was just a mouthpiece. He didn't have the right to decide how this matter would develop. In the end, it would still be reported to Emperor Ying. What he needed now was to figure out what could satisfy Yang Qindong and make him lend money to the Southern Ming Empire. Unable to think of a reason, Kai Gu showed a humble appearance and looked at Yang Qindong. He said, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, don't tease me. We really don't understand these things. You just need to say something, and I will naturally report it to the emperor. He will be wise and make the final decision. Originally, he wanted to keep Kai Gu in suspense, but seeing that Kai Gu was really not good at this, Yang Qindong had to dispel the idea of letting the other party guess. He said, "To be honest, there is indeed nothing in the southern Ming Empire that the mercenary leader would like." Min Wang and Bai Ming are eyeing covetously from the side. "Even if you are willing to give us land, I think the mercenary leader may not agree. Moreover, you don't want the mercenaries to intervene in the internal affairs of the great Ming Empire." He. Kai Gu smiled awkwardly. What a joke. Land was the foundation of a country. Even if the mercenaries wanted it, Zhu Qizhen wouldn't give it to them. Besides, the southern Ming Empire was already chaotic enough. If the mercenaries were to intervene at this time, wouldn't it be even more chaotic? Looking at Kai Ji's obviously fawning smile, Yang Qindong knew that he had spoken the other party's mind. He continued, "This time, the amount of money that Ingzong needs is really too much. If it's converted into antiques and similar items, it would probably be an astronomical figure. You can't afford it." Yes. Kai Gu nodded and said, "The emperor is very generous to us servants. Usually, he would reward us with a lot of things. Now that there are years of wars, the national treasury is already empty." Yang Qindong nodded to show that he understood. He hesitated and said, "Since the land is useless and there are no antiques, then I really don't know what is valuable. I'm afraid this matter is not easy to handle." Yang Qindong revealed an awkward expression, and even had the intention of retreating. Kai Gu saw all of this and couldn't help but feel his heart tighten. This time, he was ordered to come here. The matter of the Jiaoji armistice had already failed. If he couldn't handle the matter of the silver, he could imagine what would be waiting for him when he returned to Nanjing. At this moment, he was no longer thinking about meritorious service. He was thinking about how to deal with this matter. The best result was that he didn't do anything. Therefore, he absolutely couldn't let any accidents happen to the silver tails. He immediately said to Yang Qindong with a bitter face, "Please don't, Duke Zhongdan. No matter what, our great Ming dynasty is still a powerful country. We have a large territory and a large population. It's just a few tens of millions of taels of silver. As long as the wind is calm and the world is peaceful, it won't be long before we can earn these taels of silver." Chapter 539. Yang Qindong seemed to have suddenly thought of something and seemed to have been enlightened. He looked at Kai Gu and said, "That's right. Just now, Emissary Kai's words did indeed remind me of something. The southern Ming Empire is vast and has a large population. Perhaps we can think of something from there." "Oh, is there any solution?" Seeing that the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better, Kai Gu asked with glowing eyes. Yang Qindong did not immediately say the answer. Instead, he went silent for a while before muttering to himself, "The so-called vast land and abundant resources are true. However, it is a pity that those things cannot be moved or moved. The southern Ming Empire also does not want the mercenaries to interfere with the matters there. Thus, this problem can be eliminated. As for the large population, this duke recalled what the mercenary leader said a while ago. He said that if we want to build a base for the mercenaries in Jiaoji, we will need a large number of people. It is clear that after the war, too many people died in Jiaoji. The population is already showing signs of negative growth. If the southern Ming Empire can provide some people, perhaps we can borrow some money." "Provide people?" Kai Gu was confused by Yang Qindong's words. His face was filled with confusion. "Yes, provide people." Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind as he said, "Nowadays, the southern Ming Empire needs money to train the new army. However, money doesn't just fall from the sky. It's impossible for us to not have to pay anything and just talk about money without paying anything. On the surface, it seems that this duke is in charge of the Yang family bank. However, you should be able to guess that the mastermind behind all of this is the mercenary leader. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the goods that are selling everywhere are all produced by the mercenaries. I am just putting on an act and helping out a little." Yes. Kai Gu nodded his head continuously. Regarding the Yang family bank, the immortal abode in Bai Ming's capital, and the sky beyond heaven, the outside world had already come to a conclusion. They also believed that these achievements had nothing to do with Yang Chendong. After all, he was so young and the Yang family's background was so clean. How could so many good things suddenly appear in the world? There was only one explanation. There was someone else behind this, and this person was most likely the mysterious mercenary. Now that Yang Chendong had explained himself, the result was the same as everyone else's guess. It was no wonder that Kai Gu kept nodding at this time to express his agreement. Seeing that Kai Gu agreed with him, Yang Chendong knew that the matter was almost done. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, "Most of the money in the Yang family's bank is from mercenaries. If you want to borrow money from them, you will have to get their permission. In other words, you need to give them something that will satisfy them. If that's the case, the only thing you can offer is your large population. How about this? There's no need for any collateral. The Southern Ming Empire will provide the manpower, and we'll provide the money. Let's just do the transaction. Trading people? But I don't know what the rules are." Kai Gu was a little confused by Yang Chendong's words, and his face was in a state of confusion. It must be said that there were indeed cases of human trafficking among the people. However, it was mostly due to the lack of servants in large families. Only then would they occasionally buy some. It was normal to say a dozen more, or a few less. The amount of money traded was also very limited. It could be as small as a few silver taels, or as large as a few hundred silver taels. But this time, the Southern Ming Empire needed tens of millions of silver taels. How many people would they need to buy? Seeing Kai Ji's doubts, Yang Chendong explained, "Human trafficking has been going on since ancient times. I don't think there's a need for me to say anything about it. The only problem with this transaction is that the Southern Ming Empire needs too much money. Naturally, the amount of people needed to be traded must be large. How about this? I will make the decision for the leader of the mercenaries, my brother. We will use 20 silver taels to buy a woman from our great Ming Empire. Children under 10 years old will be 15 silver taels. Elders over 50 years old will be 5 silver taels. Males between 14 to 40 years old will be 50 silver taels per person. As for how many people the Southern Ming Empire can provide, the mercenaries will pay the same amount of money. How about it?" After beating around the bush for a long time, Yang Chendong finally brought up the matter of him needing a large number of people in a very shady manner. The reason why he didn't bring up this matter at the start was because he was afraid that Kai Gu would have other ideas. Like now, when the other party was at his wit's end, bringing up this kind of exchange condition would be more acceptable. As expected, Kai Gu didn't think too much about it. On the contrary, he began to calculate the cost of this human trafficking transaction in his mind. Using 20 silver taels for a woman as an example, this kind of price wasn't considered very generous. After all, when some large families wanted to buy maidservants, they would often offer a higher price than this. However, the mercenaries wanted a large number of people. They weren't picky, especially in terms of appearance. This wasn't something that those large families could compare to. Since a woman was 20 silver taels, 10 of them would be 200 silver taels, 100 would be 2,000 silver taels, then what about 10,000? What about 100,000? Wouldn't that be 2 million taels? In addition to the elderly and children, 100,000 would be another 2 million taels. The existence of these people wouldn't be of much use to the great Ming Empire. On the contrary, their existence was mostly a waste of food. If these people could be thrown out, then wouldn't the Southern Ming Empire be able to save a lot of resources? Not to mention, a young man would be worth 50 silver taels. 100,000 people would be a total of 5 million taels. Speaking of which, what the Southern Ming Empire had the most right now was naturally the population. Especially with the Min King's rebellion, many refugees from Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were heading towards Nanjing. On the way here, Kai Gu saw countless refugees. With a rough estimate, the population was at least 1 to 2 million. If all these people were traded to the mercenaries, how much would it be worth? Wouldn't the money for the training of the new army be easily gathered? Not to mention that the mission would be completed, it would also reduce the pressure on the Southern Ming Empire. Wasn't this killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Presumably, after the mission was completed, the emperor would definitely look at him in a new light. The more he thought about it, the more excited Kai Ji's heart became. When he looked at Yang Chendong, there was a burning feeling in his eyes. Duke Zhongdan, I wonder if there is a limit to this transaction? There is no limit. It depends on how much money you need and how many people you can provide. Of course, there's one thing that needs to be said, and that is that we won't force you to buy them. You shouldn't force us to sell them to you either. If you force them and they try to escape or commit suicide on the way here, then we won't take the blame. Those people's bodies still have to be sent back, and the money has to be returned. Otherwise, if we anger the mercenaries, it won't be good for anyone. Yang Chendong had to make things clear. He understood the way the Southern Ming Empire did things. In order to achieve their goal, they would do anything. If they really sent some weak and sick people to his side and kept all the good seedlings, then who knew how many families would be broken up? Under such circumstances, would the Han people who were traded be able to stay and work at his side with peace of mind? If that was the case, it would take a lot of energy to do the ideological work of these people every day. In order to prevent such a thing from happening, some ugly things must be said first. Of course, our Southern Ming Empire won't do such a despicable thing. Kai Gu quickly waved his hand, although he did have such an idea. In fact, similar things would happen in the process of trading people, but it really couldn't be done too much. Otherwise, angering the mercenaries really wouldn't be beneficial. That's good. Since Envoy Kai knows how to handle this matter, then I won't say anything more. This is the matter. You can go back and reply to the Emperor. If you agree, the Yang family bank will first enter Nanjing City, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianghu Prefecture. Then the trade will be carried out there. In the end, all the people will be transported to the Songjiang Prefecture's dock. There will be mercenaries there to accept the people. You can take the silver from the Yang family bank in the 3 places through the bills issued by them. After Yang Chendong gave the method and process of the trade, he made a request. These 3 newly opened Yang family bank, I need my 4th brother to manage. I know that he should be in Nanjing's capital now. It should be easy to find him. His 4th brother was Yang Chendong. Previously, Zhu Qizhen wanted to use this person to threaten Yang Chendong. But now that everyone was cooperating, the so-called threat no longer existed. With Kai Ji's identity, he naturally knew about Yang. Before he came, the emperor had ordered that if the Duke of Loyal Courage asked about this matter, he had to explain it well. He had to say that he liked Yang's ability and wanted him to go to the capital to be an official. In short, this matter could not cause displeasure between both sides. Now that Yang Chendong did not delve into what was going on, he naturally would not deliberately mention this matter. He immediately nodded, indicating that there was no problem. Yang Chendong only mentioned the matter of his 4th brother. He believed that with Kai Ji's intelligence, he would know how to reply to Zhu Qizhen. As for the matter of him wanting to be conferred the title of king, he did not mention it again. Now was not the time to force him. It was better to get a large number of people first. As for the other matters, he believed that when the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. The meeting between the 2 sides went smoothly. Kai Gu was also very satisfied. After he said what he needed to say, he stood up and bid farewell. Now that the war in Jianghu was over, but it seemed that the mercenaries did not have any intention of letting go. They still wanted to use the Lancang kingdom to attack. He needed to report this matter to Yingzhong and make a decision as soon as possible. There was also the matter of the population trade. After all, if he got the silver first, he could train the new army first. The South Ming Kingdom would be able to reach the moment of strength earlier. Chapter 540. Kai Gu, who knew that there was no time to lose, packed up his luggage after leaving Yang Chendong's residence. In less than half an hour, he left Shiyu City and went straight back to Nanjing. Tiger's man reported the news of Kai Ji's departure to Yang Chendong, and then said with some worry, "Young master, do you think the Southern Ming Empire will agree to the human trade?" "They will, they have no choice now. Besides, there are wars everywhere, and now there are many refugees. They are still worried about how to solve this matter. We have given them such a gap, they will definitely take advantage of it," Yang Chendong said confidently. It was no wonder that he would be so confident. At that time, the idea of people-oriented did not penetrate deep into people's hearts, and no emperor would really pay much attention to it. It was nothing more than when there was no conscription, there would be a shortage of people. As for normal times, there wouldn't be so many people thinking about it. Moreover, the Great Ming Empire had just experienced its heyday, and the population was more than 60 million. This time it was just a transaction of 100,000 people. It was really not a big deal. Inform everyone that the Yang family bank is ready to enter Nanjing, Songjiang, and Jianning. In addition, inform Qiqian City to prepare enough silver. If there is not enough silver when the transaction is done, it will be a joke. Yang Chendong gave an order to Tiger's man. The bank was newly established, and the silver reserves were naturally needed. However, relying on the Baiming Yang family bank was obviously not enough to support the overall situation. Fortunately, Qiqian City had already accumulated a lot of gold and silver. Not to mention how much profit the Navy could make from controlling the sea area, the advanced products produced by the factories were in short supply once they were shipped out, and they could all be sold at a high price. How could there be a shortage of silver? Tiger's man left, leaving Yang Chendong standing in the yard with an indifferent expression. This human trade was originally part of his plan, but he hadn't figured out how to do it. Kai Ji's appearance gave him a chance to do it openly. It could be imagined that once there were enough Han people, the road of expansion could continue. Otherwise, they could only fight for the country and not defend it. This kind of expansion would lose its meaning. Of course, it would take some time for the human trafficking to be completed. What he needed to do now was to settle the matter in Jiaoji. How to stabilize the hearts of the people and how to make this place a bridgehead for the mercenaries to attack and retreat was the focus of the recent work. Call Kong Jie and Xianxia here. Yang Chendong thought about the importance of talents, so he thought of the two political commissars. Yes. Beta Persei responded and turned to leave. Only Yang Chendong's figure was left in the courtyard, standing between heaven and earth. With the arrival of the mercenaries and 45,000 educated youths, the situation in Xiyu City had undergone earth-shattering changes. The streets were much cleaner than usual. There were more shops in the city that could be freely traded. The granaries in the city were also completely opened, allowing the people to trade freely. There were many more patrolling soldiers on the streets to ensure the stability of law and order. At the same time, there were also some criminals who wanted to fish in troubled waters, so that the safety of the people could be better maintained. To be able to restore the city that was originally damaged by the war, especially the destruction caused by the mortar shells, in such a short period of time, it was naturally beneficial to the joint efforts of everyone. Among them, the two political commissars who were in charge of political work were especially important. Under Yang Chendong's request, the political workers not only needed to be able to stabilize the morale of the army during wartime, but also needed to display their unique abilities in the city's construction. In this regard, Kong Jie and Xianxia did very well. Under their command and leadership, the political workers at all levels in the army displayed their abilities. Xiyu City could be said to be changing every day. Just when the two were busy, a member of the second guard squad found the two political commissars and said that the sixth young master wanted to see them. The members of the guard squad had long been in the eyes of the officers at all levels, so they naturally recognized them. Seeing the person coming, the two political commissars did not say anything. After handing over the matters at hand, they followed the person to the temporary palace in the city. In the same courtyard, Yang Chendong had some fruits and tea on the table in front of him. Seeing the two political commissars coming over under the lead of Beta Persei, Yang Chendong smiled and waved at them. Come, sit here. Kong Jie and Xianxia were somewhat flattered and hurriedly stepped forward, then each found a seat and sat down. The Jiaoji kingdom was destroyed so quickly. Not to mention others, even the mercenary officers did not expect it. Because of this, Yang Chendong was once again a legend. While his glorious image was deeply rooted in people's hearts, it also made people look up to him even more. Sensing the nervousness of the two political commissars, Yang Chendong laughed and said, Relax. You don't have to be so nervous here. This time, I called you over because I know you've worked hard. Let's relax and have a casual chat. Kong Jie and Xianxia did not really think that the sixth young master called them over for a chat. The two of them sat there and looked at each other, then said in unison, Sixth young master, if you have anything to say, just say the word. Haha, okay. Seeing that the two political commissars knew that he had something to say to them, Yang Chendong smiled, then got up and poured a cup of tea for each of them. His attitude made the two of them stand up immediately. To be able to have the sixth young master pour tea for them, this treatment was too good. The two of them felt uneasy. Fortunately, Yang Chendong quickly explained the reason for calling them over. The two of you have worked hard during this period of time, and your work has been very effective. However, even though we have conquered Jiaoji, this is only the first step. How to govern this place and let the people here get used to our governance is the most important thing. How about it? Have the two of you ever thought of quitting the military and staying here to govern? Yang Chendong chuckled. He was ready to appoint generals. People say that it is easier to conquer a country than to defend it. The current Jiaoji was facing such a problem. It was impossible for the mercenaries to stay here for too long. They had too many things to do. Therefore, in the future, this place would have to be independent. Even though the Jiaoji mercenaries and the natives of Jiaoji like Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Wan Chunqing were in charge, Yang Chendong wouldn't be at ease if he didn't leave his own people behind. The reason he called the two of them over was obviously to choose one of them and leave one of them behind to govern Jiaoji. Yang Chendong had quite a number of generals under his command. After training and systematic learning, many of them had the ability to lead an army and fight on their own. However, in comparison, he had enough generals, but not enough civil officials. There were even fewer civil officials who could govern a place. After much consideration, Yang Chendong set his sights on the two political commissars, Kong Jie and Song Zhe. After a period of observation, the performance of these two people was very good. So Yang Chendong could rest assured and entrust them with heavy responsibilities. In fact, he could have ordered one of them to stay behind, but he didn't do so. He wanted to see what they wanted to do. After all, nothing forcibly done was worth it. The two of them didn't expect the sixth young master to call them over for this. Caught off guard, the two of them hesitated. As the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, it was rare for him to lead an army alone. However, he was still one of the commanding officers of the 1st Regiment. Furthermore, he had such a powerful mercenary army. When he fought a battle, it was truly a pleasure to him. Moreover, with such a modern army under his command, he would be able to contribute a lot to the war. If they were to withdraw from the army now, it would be equivalent to giving away a lot of their contributions. This made them somewhat reluctant. Besides, they could tell that the destruction of Jiaoji was only the result of the mercenary army's initial efforts. There would be many more such incidents in the future. If they stayed behind in Jiaoji now, would they still be able to climb to a higher position in the future? Everyone has their own selfish motives, but they are also ambitious. If they stayed in Jiaoji, it would be equivalent to stopping their progress. It was no wonder they were in such a difficult position. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Chendong saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He was waiting for the two of them to make their own decisions. If they didn't want to withdraw from the army, he wouldn't force them to do anything. He would continue to look for suitable candidates. However, the two of them had a lower status in his heart. After all, they didn't see the big picture and couldn't see the big picture. Such an officer's future was limited. Time passed by slowly. After Yang Chendong drank 2 cups of tea, Kong Jie and Song Zhe finally came to a decision. After looking at each other, they spoke at the same time. "Sixth young master, I am willing to stay." Yang Chendong didn't expect the two of them to speak at the same time. Of course, he was very satisfied. Good, good. It's rare for you to see the big picture. Since that's the case. Yang Chendong's gaze lingered between Kong Jie and Song Zhe. He looked at Kong Jie and Song Zhe and said, "Song Zhe will stay. Other than the 30,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, I will leave you with a platoon of Lung Feng and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. Also, if you have any other requests, feel free to state them." Choosing Song Zhe over Kong Jie was naturally because the former was only a political commissar of the auxiliary army. Compared to political work, Kong Jie was obviously better. Therefore, Yang Chendong had long wanted Song Zhe to stay in the company. Since Kong Jie had taken the initiative to ask for it, he decided to make the decision. Chapter 541. It was reasonable that Song Zhe was willing to stay. He was only the political commissar of the auxiliary division. Even though he was doing a good job, he still needed some free time to be promoted to political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment. Since there was no room for him to rise in the military, he might as well take up a position in the local government first. The 6th young master was the one who suggested this. Song Zhe was sure that the other party would take note of his tactfulness. If there were any good opportunities in the future, the other party would surely remember him. As for the other requests, Xianxia thought about it carefully and made a suggestion. Sixth young master, if it's possible, I hope to open a young family bank in Jianghu. Although I haven't done any management work, I think Jianghu should be built into a commercial center that radiates to the surrounding areas. If that's the case, it's necessary to have a young family bank to manage the finances. Over the past few days, a lot of resources had been shipped to Xiyu City from the sea. Most of them were clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. The clothing was mainly of various styles. Since this place was going to be managed by the mercenaries in the future, the clothes worn by the people would have to be changed to be more Chinese. They would have to change into traditional Chinese clothing. At the very least, they would have to change from a visual perspective. Fortunately, the garment factory in Xianxia City had expanded in scale. It wasn't too difficult to satisfy the needs of Jianghu. As for the food, it was naturally a large amount of potatoes. Even though it was a little boring to eat them all the time, it was enough to satisfy one's hunger. A person would only have the energy to do more things after eating a full meal. As long as they could endure this period of time, more land in Jianghu would be developed. With more land, not only would they be able to be self-sufficient in terms of food, they might even be able to supply other places. As for the living, it was even simpler. They would have to build more houses. Xianxia City would provide some cement. In addition, there were many mountains, forests, and trees in the vicinity of Jianghu. Building more houses wouldn't be a problem. The last line was related to the problem of road construction. After all, there was a limit to the production of cement. Therefore, they would first have to level the roads between the cities. Then, a cement factory would be built in Jianghu. Slowly, the main road here would be paved with cement. With the development of transportation, there was naturally no problem for commerce to flourish. Yang Chendong had already made certain arrangements before entering Jianghu. Now he just had to do things step by step. Xianxia, who knew a little about these things, only needed to follow the plan. However, before the troops and horses were mobilized, the provisions had to be mobilized first. In order to build a place, the most important thing was money. That was why he proposed to set up a young family bank here. As long as there was a bank, the initial funds could be operated in the form of loans. When there was money in the future, it could be slowly repaid. Sure. Yang Chendong nodded and agreed after Xianxia finished speaking. Setting up a young family bank in Jianghu was part of his plan. Even if Xianxia didn't mention it, he would have arranged for someone to do it. Then I have no further questions. Xianxia quickly nodded. Since the sixth young master had already arranged everything, there wasn't much for him to consider. As for whether he would encounter problems in his work in the future, he would just have to deal with them when he encountered them. Good. If there's anything else, you can send someone to contact me. I will settle it for you. Yang Chendong didn't have the experience of building a small country. Therefore, he couldn't overthink everything. Therefore, he gave Xianxia the privilege of being able to contact him at any time. The matter was finally settled. Xianxia became the temporary person in charge of Jianghu and Chang Qianhao became the first chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. Yang Chendong hoped that the two of them could work together to transform Jianghu into a truly prosperous place. The matter of Jianghu could be put aside for now. Yang Chendong set his sights on the neighboring Lansong kingdom. Fan Yuhai brought 20,000 Jianghu elites and fled to this kingdom. Logically speaking, this was a good excuse to launch a military attack on the Lansong kingdom. Just like when he dealt with Jianghu previously, he was here under the banner of the Southern Ming Emperor, and also to avenge the assassination attempt on his life. With enough justification, he had a good reason to attack. Now that he had an excuse to deal with the Lansong kingdom, Yang Chendong really wanted to lead the mercenaries to annihilate the kingdom. Unfortunately, before Yang Chendong could decide what to do, the Lansong kingdom had already sent someone to inform him that they were encircling Fan Yuhai's troops. They would definitely give the mercenaries and the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty an explanation. Initially, he thought that it would be too big of a step to make a move on the Lansong kingdom before Jianghu was stabilized. Since there was no excuse to attack, Yang Chendong could only wait and observe. At the same time, he used this opportunity to train his troops. Speaking of which, in the Battle of Jianghu, there were too many auxiliary soldiers who contributed greatly and earned the right to be promoted to the Cold Vanguard. At the same time, There were also many temporary auxiliary soldiers who performed well and earned the right to be promoted to auxiliary soldiers. Now, the military was focused on this matter. Even the political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment, Kong Jia, was no longer busy with the construction of Jianghu. Instead, he started to organize the promotion assessment. Everyone was busy. Yang Qindong brought the first and second guards to join the assessment team. He acted as an invigilator to assess the outstanding soldiers who were promoted from auxiliary soldiers to Cold Vanguard. Southern Ming capital. Nanjing City. Kai Gu, who was covered in dust, rushed back. As soon as he entered the city, before he could even take a sip of water, an embroidered uniform guard appeared in front of him and brought him to Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect. "Beloved Minister Kai, how did it go?" Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously when he saw Kai Gu in the side hall of the palace. In the side hall, Chao Jixiang, Qian Sangliang, Kai Zhong, and a few other eunuch leaders were also present. Kai Gu knelt on the ground and recounted everything he had seen and heard along the way, including the current situation of Jianghu. Listening to Kai Gu kneeling on the ground and saying something, Zhu Qizhen's face was sometimes gloomy and sometimes relaxed. His expression was constantly changing. Not only him, but the eunuchs standing below were also shocked. They didn't expect Jianghu to be wiped out in such a short period of time. This gave them a new understanding and evaluation of the strength of the mercenaries. In less than an hour, Kai Gutsai reported everything he had seen and heard, especially everything he had talked about with the Duke of Loyalty. Then, he kowtowed to the ground with a respectful expression, waiting for the emperor to deal with him. Jianghu was destroyed just like that, and Lily was captured alive? Zhu Qizhen said in a daze. It could be seen that the high and mighty Zhu Qizhen's expression wasn't too good. Even when the great Ming dynasty was at its peak, it was impossible for them to crush Jianghu like they did with the mercenaries. Perhaps the great Ming dynasty's ideology of moderation played a role in this. They never had the thought of destroying other countries. But no matter what, they couldn't do anything to Jianghu. Now, however, the mercenaries easily destroyed them. Even the old King Lily fell into the hands of the mercenaries and became their prisoner. Judging others by their own standards, how could he not feel a trace of sadness when he thought about such a thing? If the mercenaries could destroy Jianghu so easily, wouldn't it be a huge headache if they became the enemy of the great Ming dynasty? What was going on with Yang Qindong? Why didn't he see that he had this kind of ability before? Was it really just a coincidence that he saved the mercenary leader who had never appeared before, and that's how he gained his current power? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Zhu Qizhen's mind. He actually felt a faint sense of worry in his heart. Zhu Qizhen was speechless for a long time. Chao Jixiang, who was at the side, saw this and guessed the reason. This was also a skill of the head eunuch. If he couldn't guess the emperor's thoughts, he wouldn't be far from being marginalized. In the eyes of the eunuchs, the emperor was their sky and their earth. Naturally, no accidents could happen to him. Chao Jixiang only hesitated for a moment before advising, "Your Majesty, Jianghu is a small country with a population of less than 2 million. Compared to the great Ming dynasty, its cities are like fireflies competing with the bright moon. How can they be compared to the sun? Even if the mercenaries came to occupy our great Ming dynasty, they wouldn't have the strength to do so. It's just that the mercenaries reminded us that we have to become stronger ourselves." The first part of his words was to enlighten Zhu Qizhen, while the latter part was hinting at him. Sadness wouldn't solve the problem. Only by developing oneself and strengthening oneself would one be able to do so. To be able to become the emperor, one's wisdom was naturally not something ordinary people could compare to. Just now, he couldn't think straight, which was why he revealed a worried expression. Now that he heard Chao Jixiang's reminder, he thought about his own advantage. If he had to make an analogy, they were like an elephant and the mercenaries were like a poisonous snake. No matter how big the other party's appetite was, they wouldn't be able to swallow him in one gulp. That would only cause indigestion. Otherwise, when he dealt with the Huang bandit army, wouldn't he have taken the opportunity to do something to the southern Ming dynasty? However, they didn't. This was already very clear. Of course, the other party's strength could increase at any time. If he couldn't grasp this opportunity to help the southern Ming dynasty rise, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Zhu Qizhen, who had made up his mind to become stronger, seemed to be filled with energy at this moment. Looking at the kneeling Kai Gu, he said, Dear Minister Kai, please repeat the conditions that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage mentioned. Chapter 542. Yes, Your Majesty. Kai Gu nodded and repeated Yang Qindong's request. In the following time, Zhu Qizhen and the eunuchs discussed how much money they needed to train the new army and how many people they needed to trade. Just as Yang Qindong had expected, Zhu Qizhen did not pay much attention to population. Especially after Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were occupied by the Min King's forces. Many refugees escaped from there and were now entrenched in the southeastern provinces. There were even many who were heading towards Nanjing. According to the reports of the officials, the appearance of these refugees had greatly affected the security of other places. Their daily necessities alone were a big problem, which often gave the local officials a headache. This time they could use the method of trading to transport these people out. As for whether this would strengthen the mercenary army, not to mention that they did not provide the population, did the mercenary army not have other ways? It was very difficult to make these refugees into an army. These people did not have enough to eat, they did not have warm clothes, and their health was generally not good. Otherwise, the southern Ming Empire would have recruited them into the army. Otherwise, the Min King's forces would not have easily let them leave their territory. In short, these people were of little value to Zhu Qizhen. Most of them were even burdens. It was a good opportunity to give them to the mercenary army and let them have a headache. It was also a good way to make them worry so that they would not threaten him with a strong army. After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhen began to order the 3 eunuchs to count the refugee population. According to him, other than those young people with strong bodies and beautiful young women, the rest of the refugees could be used for trading. If they could exchange a large amount of money, the southern Ming Empire would have the strength to train the new army and strengthen themselves. The number of refugees had already been reported by the local officials. The number of refugees had reached 5 million. Most of them were refugees from Guangdong. Because they had been prepared for the arrival of King of Min's forces in Guangdong, they only got some fields and houses, but very few people. The number of refugees in Guangdong alone had reached nearly 3 million. Among the 5 million people, the ratio of women and men was almost equal, each taking up a third. The ratio of old people and children was also almost equal, each taking up a sixth. With this calculation, a rough result could be obtained from the accounts. The women had about 1.5 million, each 20 taels of silver, which was 30 million taels of silver. The old people had about 900,000, each 5 taels of silver, which was 4.5 million taels of silver. The children had about 900,000, each 15 taels of silver, which was 13.5 million taels of silver. The men had about 1 million, each 500,000 taels of silver, which was 50 million taels of silver. Altogether, the total population was about 4,300,000 people. If they were to trade, they would be able to obtain 98 million taels of silver. After the number came out, even Zhu Qizhen could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He didn't expect that a group of vagrants could increase his income so much. Once they had this 98 million taels of silver, the economy of the southern Ming Empire would be revitalized. Not only would they have the money to train the new army, they could also make more armor and weapons. At the same time, they could also use it to develop the country. It was not impossible for the southern Ming Empire to have a drastic change. Haha, good. Zhu Qizhen said the word good 3 times in a row, completely revealing the excitement in his heart. Pass down my decree, order all the provinces to send all the refugees to the Songjiang prefecture. And, not only the refugees, but also those who have committed crimes and have not changed. They will also be sent to the Songjiang prefecture. Great companion, this matter will be handed over to you and beloved Minister Kai Zhong. That's right, don't forget about the Yang family's 4th brother. Immediately remove the surveillance on him and let him quickly contact the Yang family bank. Tell him the specific amount of money we can trade. Don't let them not take out enough money when the time comes. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen had already thrown the threat of Yang Qindong to the side. What he needed to do now was to let the southern Ming Empire rise again under his leadership. Zhu Qizhen's imperial edicts were passed down without the discussion of the ministers. The reason why he did this was because he did not want to give people the chance to argue. With his understanding of the ministers, once they knew that he had a human trade with the mercenaries, they would definitely stand up to stop it. Even though these ministers were already helpless against the refugees. They had read the books of sages since they were young, so they naturally wanted to learn how to be a saint. They would definitely not agree to abandon the people like this. Since they would not agree, then why did he need their permission? He was the emperor. However, there was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, not to mention that this matter involved so many people. In less than a day, the ministers below knew about this matter. Then, they hurriedly walked into the palace. Needless to say, they were here to persuade him. Regarding this, Zhu Qizhen was already prepared. He used his body as an excuse and refused to meet anyone. As for whether they would make a fuss when they did not see him, it was up to them. If it were not for the Southern Ming Empire's ancestral teachings that there was no need to punish a doctor, he really did not mind looking for a few people at this time to kill the prestige of those ministers who only knew how to eat, drink, and enjoy every day and were useless at critical times. After the Imperial edict was passed down, the first to benefit was naturally the Yang family's fourth master, Yang. He was originally staying in Jianghu Prefecture. Suddenly, a group of embroidered uniform guards came and took him away from the Yang family's ancestral home without any explanation. This scene was seen by many people at that time. Originally, Jianghu Prefecture's magistrate, Li Daotong, wanted to stop it because he knew that this person was the brother of the Duke of Loyal and Courageous. Once something happened in his territory, how could he get away with it? However, when he appeared with a group of magistrates and saw that they were all embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes, black gauze hats, imperial belts, and embroidered spring sabers at their waists, he immediately became terrified. These were all the emperor's people. If he dared to stand out and say half a word, he was afraid that he would be arrested together with them. Seeing that Li Daotong did not even dare to breathe loudly, Yang did not blame him. In fact, he had already prepared for this scene in front of him. He had always heard about some of the things that his sixth brother had done. His achievements were so great that the Yang family would be implicated sooner or later. Therefore, along the way, Yang did not shout or make a fuss. He just followed the embroidered uniform guards and left Jianghu Prefecture. His cooperation also saved him from physical pain. Not long after leaving Jianghu, another group of embroidered uniform guards came and announced that this time, it was Emperor Yingzong who invited him to Nanjing to be an official. With the arrival of these embroidered uniform guards, his treatment also improved. At least, no one gave him any face in front of his face. As soon as he entered Nanjing, he was placed in a small courtyard and detained. Although his personal freedom was not restricted, and no one would stop him even if he wanted to go out shopping, there were always embroidered uniform guards following him. However, there were always some embroidered uniform guards following him, which made him realize that he was being watched. Thinking about it, the reason why these people did not make a move on him was probably because his sixth brother's power was flourishing. Before things were settled, they did not want to anger his sixth brother. Just like this, less than 20 days later, an imperial edict suddenly appeared in front of him. He was specially appointed by Emperor Yingzong as the general representative of the Yang family bank in southern Ming. For a time, all the embroidered uniform guards around him withdrew. This time they really withdrew. No one came to monitor him. He, who had just regained his freedom, saw the current head of the eunuchs, Chao Jixiang, appear in front of him. First, he comforted him for a while. Then, he talked about the problem of the population trade between southern Ming and the Duke of Zhongdan. He also asked him to quickly choose a location in Nanjing, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianghu Prefecture and then raise money. Although it was mostly used to describe women, it could also be used to describe Yang's current situation. Just as Chao Jixiang left with his people, a platoon of cold soldiers appeared in front of him. The person leading them was the platoon leader, Silver Tiger. This person had stayed in the Yang family manor outside Baiming's capital and was one of Yang Qindong's trusted subordinates. Silver Tiger's arrival was not only to protect fourth master Yang's safety, but also to help him prepare the Yang family bank. Many contacts with the security bureau had to go through his hands. This was not because Yang Qindong did not trust his fourth brother, but because he did not want his fourth brother to be involved in dangerous matters. The news that southern Ming was going to trade people with the mercenaries spread like a gust of wind. For a time, the various powers had different reactions. When the news reached Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, who was the acting head, was silent at first. Then, He loudly reprimanded Zhu Qizhen in front of his civil and military officials. Since the founding of the Great Ming, our Great Ming has benefited tens of thousands of people. We are determined to let them live a good life. When did we ever trade people? This Zhu Qizhen clearly doesn't care about the rules of our ancestors. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu was already on the same level as Zhu Qizhen. He no longer called him Great Master Ing like before. At the very least, he would call him Elder Cousin. Instead, he directly called him by his name. Zhu Qiyu sat on the golden dragon throne and raged. The officials below all lowered their heads and did not say anything. When the Great Ming was first established, there were indeed some rules. For example, there were no political marriages, no tribute, the Son of Heaven guarded the country, the king died for the country, and so on. This was already a lot more unyielding compared to other dynasties. However, there was no such thing as trading people was prohibited in these rules. Not to mention, in order to survive, the Southern Ming even gave the title of king with a different surname. What did it matter if they traded people for military funds? You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.